The Committee on Education Workforce will come to order. I note that a quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to call recess at any time. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's hearing. Acting Secretary Sue, I'd like to start by saying you've been a hard witness to schedule. The committee began working with the department to secure your in-person testimony beginning in March. When you would not appear in May, we honored your request to appear in June, using a date, June 7, that was offered by your staff and to which you agreed. We have been more than accommodating to establish a mutual date for this meeting, for this hearing. So why is it that on late Friday evening, following the committee's public posting of the hearing a week ago, your staff told us that you were, quote, no longer able to make June 7th work? What was so important that you were willing to stop the work of a congressional committee, upend the schedule of 45 members of Congress, and leave the American people's concerns unanswered? The hearing is not about you or your pending nomination. It is about assessing the budget proposal for the Department of Labor and the department's performance and adherence to its statutory mandate. However, your effort to evade transparency at the 11th hour calls into question your ability to fulfill your duty as a potential Secretary of Labor. Acting Secretary Sue, you're sitting here today only because I informed you that I would issue a subpoena to compel your attendance at this previously agreed to hearing, and you reconsidered your cancellation. I'm glad that you reconsidered that lapse in judgment. I'm unaware of this committee ever needing to consider such action for a department's annual hearing until now. You cannot run from this responsibility. Congress and the American people have questions about how you've been running the department. Overall, Biden's FY 2024 budget calls for $1.5 billion more in discretionary spending for the Department of Labor than it received last year. Considering your continued unwillingness to provide fully responsive answers to committee oversight requests, this budget increase can only be seen as a tacit nod of approval by the President that the department can continue skirting accountability to taxpayers. If enacted, the budget would add 2,000 new federal bureaucrats. If the current 17,000 can't sufficiently respond to a single committee request, I don't think adding 2,000 more will help the department's bureaucratic sclerosis. If anything, more bureaucrats will mean more mounds of paperwork and more red tape under which to bury our oversight request. Worse, this paperwork and red tape will bury workers and businesses trying to make a living. We should be shrinking, not expanding the size of the federal government. Nevertheless, after years of conducting oversight, I've found that no amount of bureaucratic red tape can obfuscate an objectively poor record. When the record speaks for itself, its inherent contradictions, its complications, and its confusions will naturally resolve to clarity. We're here to talk about your department's record, Acting Secretary Sue, and it doesn't hold up well. The department's rap sheet is long. It includes over 100 planned rulemakings and long-term actions. From his first day in office, Biden reversed many Trump administration policies that would have promoted hiring and employment opportunities, and he began pursuing radical policies that would expand the size and scope of government and pay back big labor. The Biden administration has amassed a troubling record of big labor bias at the expense of American workers. This culture of union favoritism undermines workers' rights. Washington should not be in the business of picking winners and losers in our economy, but that's exactly what the Biden administration is doing, whether it be through attempting to overturn every right-to-work law in the country, eliminating independent contracting, jeopardizing franchise businesses, or rewarding union bosses with unchecked power by acquiescing to every item on their wish list. The PRO Act is but one example of the administration's union favoritism. It is championed by the AFL-CIO, big labor groups, socialist Bernie Sanders, and now the Department of Labor. Due to legislative gridlock, the department is trying to bypass congressional authority by implementing the PRO Act's key features in pieces through regulation. If enacted, it would destroy the livelihoods of millions of workers, including independent contractors who overwhelmingly prefer their current worker status. President Biden's anti-worker agenda is hurting our economy. We watched its impact on our workforce during COVID. Acting Secretary Sue, while you were Deputy Secretary, the department imposed a tyrannical, illegal vaccine mandate on employers. The rule applied to nearly 84 million in our workforce. Not only was the department wrong on the science of COVID, but it also compromised our economic supply chain because of its sweeping dictates. America needs a Department of Labor aligned with its priorities, like filling the more than 10 million open jobs in the United States. Yet every action the department takes does one of two things. At best, it pushes a misguided union agenda. At worst, it subverts our economic stability and prosperity to do so. As I reviewed the FY 2024 budget request, I saw more of the same. In it, the administration requested $81 million more for the Wage and Hour Division, WHD. This is currently a $310 million federal office responsible for enforcing several important workforce laws, and the American people would be incensed if they knew just how badly it is run. Under your supervision, the number of workers receiving back wages is the lowest on record for WHD, down by more than 51% from 4 years ago. Over those 4 years, the WHD has received a 10% bump in funding, yet it has achieved half the result. The taxpayers are not giving a blank check for the department's ineptitude, and WHD does not deserve a dollar more. Acting Secretary Sue, I could spend all day going line by line through this budget. There are places where we agree, like expanding apprenticeship programs, but even here, I think the department comes up short. Instead of making the workforce system more responsive to employer needs, the Biden administration has doubled down on burdensome registered apprenticeships while shuttering the industry-recognized apprenticeship program. It's hard to think of a worse response to our worker shortage. At heart, we disagree on guiding principles and how we envision the government's role in our workforce. The government itself is not a job creator. The administration and the near 100 planned workforce rules don't foster economic growth. The proper role of the department is certainly not to enforce universal unionization. Rather, we should promote job creation by removing the government as much as possible from the equation. Yes, that means subtracting from and not adding billions to your budget. With that, I look forward to the hearing today and yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Dr. Fox, and Acting Secretary Sue, good morning, and thank you for being with us. You're here with us now, and we have had problems getting previous administration officials to the committee, but thank you for being with us today. We have an opportunity to discuss the work of President Biden and Acting Secretary Sue and what they've done for workers, businesses, and our economy, as well as investments we must continue to make. Committee Democrats and I strongly support Ms. Sue's nomination to be Secretary of Labor because she represents the best of America. She's the daughter of immigrants who owned a small laundromat and a franchise pizza restaurant and became the first in her family to attend law school. But we support Acting Secretary Sue's nomination not just because of who she is, but for what she has done. Throughout her service as California Labor Commissioner, Secretary of the California Labor and Workforce Development Agency, Deputy Secretary of Labor, she is a committed public servant who has dedicated her career to supporting workers and families. Thanks to her and President Biden's leadership and the responsible actions taken by Democrats in the last Congress, unemployment rates remain near historic lows, our job market is continuing to grow, and workers are seeing higher wages. Since taking office, the Biden administration has created more than 13 million jobs. That's more jobs created in 28 months than any previous president has created in a single 48-month term. According to the White House, the last time we had such a long stretch of low unemployment was in the 1960s. The share of working-age Americans in the workforce is at its highest level in 16 years. And that's the record. I also want to remind my colleagues that every Democratic administration since the Kennedy administration has left for their Republican successors a better deficit situation than the one they inherited. And every Republican administration since Nixon has left for their Democratic successors a worse deficit situation than the one they inherited, without exception. And President Biden is continuing this trend as he creates record numbers of jobs. So the evidence is clear that President Biden's economic agenda is working. This means that my Republican colleagues have had to resort to baseless claims and desperate attacks to oppose Ms. Sue's nomination. There's an old saying amongst lawyers that if you have the law on your side, pound the law. If not, but you have the facts on your side, pound the facts. But if you have neither the law nor the facts, pound the table. Julie Sue is an impeccably qualified candidate to serve as Secretary of Labor, and she has been integral to our sustained economic recovery. So get ready for people to be pounding the table. Committee Republicans may talk about unemployment insurance fraud in California. This is not Ms. Sue's doing. In fact, under her leadership, California implemented additional safeguards that helped prevent UI fraud and stopped an estimated tens of billions of dollars in fraudulent payments. They may talk about independent contractors and the Labor Department's proposed rule, but do not be confused by Republican attempts to conflate California's state law with federal regulation. The proposed regulation does not implement California's AB 5, which adopts what's known as the ABC test. In fact, the Biden administration clearly noted that it is legally constrained from adopting the ABC test, so this line of attack on Ms. Sue doesn't hold up either. Committee Republicans may talk about child labor, but Ms. Sue is certainly not among the Republican state legislators who are working to roll back child labor protections. Unfortunately, we can expect Republicans on the committee to pound the table this morning since they have no substantive criticism of Ms. Sue's record in the Department of Labor. In contrast, committee Democrats remain focused on concrete solutions to put money back into workers' pockets, keep workers healthy and safe on the job, and ensure all workers can enjoy a dignified retirement. I hope my Republican colleagues will put politics aside and work with us to deliver on these priorities. So thank you, Ms. Sue, for your leadership and for joining us today. I hope we will remain focused on what is most important, improving the lives of workers and their families. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, all members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m., 14 days after the date of this hearing, which is June 21, 2023. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days to allow such statements and other extraneous material referenced during the hearing to be submitted for the official hearing record. I now turn to the introduction of our distinguished witness and thank her for being here. We have before us today the Honorable Julie A. Sue, Acting Secretary, U.S. Department of Labor.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to testify today. I am pleased to appear before this committee to highlight the Department of Labor's fiscal year 2024 budget request. An investment in the Department of Labor is an investment in our workers and the future of our country. Through this budget, we can build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out. I recognize that Congress will be working under statutory budget caps for FY 2024, and I look forward to working with you to ensure that these priorities are reflected in the final bill. The American dream, that if you work hard, you can make it, has always been premised on having a good job. That's why this budget is fundamentally about investments in people, about what a good job does for an individual, a family, and a community. No worker should be injured or killed at work. The budget request will allow the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, to improve workplace safety and health and be better able to help employers comply with the law. The budget request for the Mine Safety and Health Administration includes an increase to enable MSHA to strengthen its efforts to reduce accidents, injuries, illnesses, and fatalities. The department's request includes funding for the Employment and Training Administration to build on the progress restoring and growing the economy following the pandemic. These resources will create pathways into the high-quality jobs created by the landmark Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, CHIPS and Science Act, and Inflation Reduction Act, and other historic investments in our nation's infrastructure, energy sectors, and manufacturing. Investments in evidence-based workforce development models will help states and local areas meet the workforce needs of their communities and the needs of industries across the country. Specifically, the budget continues support for the Registered Apprenticeship Program, in line with the President's goal to serve at least 1 million apprentices annually within 10 years. The budget request proposes a sectoral employment through career training for occupational readiness program to support the development and expansion of partnerships between employers, education and workforce development providers, and community-based groups. The department proposes additional resources for the Veterans Employment and Training Service to support a legislative proposal that expands anti-discrimination and reemployment protections to military spouses. Military spouses sacrifice daily to support their families and our country, and the administration is proposing we do more to ensure that they are able to enjoy the economic security that they deserve. Protecting workers' hard-earned pensions and health benefits is a priority for the department. The budget request for the Employee Benefits Security Administration includes an increase to continue its important work expanding access to care for mental health and substance use disorders at a time when so many Americans are living with these conditions. The agency's request includes an increase for the Missing Participants Program, as well as establishment of a retirement savings lost and found, required by the recently enacted Secure 2.0 to help reconnect retirees with the benefits they have earned. These investments will make a real difference for retired and elderly people. Working together, we can create an economy built around the dignity and value of all work and workers. I thank you for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to discussing the department's FY 2024 budget request with you and all members of the committee, and I'm happy to respond to any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sue. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Sue, I take my duty to conduct oversight very seriously. Unfortunately, Secretary Walsh did not take his obligation to respond to oversight seriously. During your short tenure, your track record appears to be about the same as his, at least until you attempted to cancel your appearance at the last minute and are here today only because my threat to issue a subpoena caused you to reconsider appearing. In most cases, you've responded to the committee's inquiries with a vague letter providing none of the requested documents, therefore, thereby technically responding to the inquiry, but not, in fact, coming close. Will you commit to providing fully responsive answers to the committee's request? Yes or no?
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Fox. I am very happy to be here today to testify. I understand that our teams worked together to
Ms. Sue,
find the date.
Yeah, I just need a yes or no answer, and I appreciate your being here. And you don't have to say thank you very much for the question. That just takes up time.
I appreciate that. Chairwoman Fox, I want to say that I take the oversight role of this committee and of Congress very seriously.
Then you'll be saying yes to my question. Yes, you will answer our request completely. Is that right?
Chairwoman Fox, my team understands that it is our job and it is my request that we respond to oversight requests and work with your team to make sure
Do you
you get what you need.
understand that failure to provide complete responses can result in the committee taking compulsory measures?
Yes.
Good. You know that word. Ms. Sue, in March, my staff requested performance information on DOL's workforce development grant programs. The department's had over 2 months, yet the information that has been provided to date is incomplete and lacks employment and earnings outcomes for a significant number of grantees. How can your department effectively manage discretionary grant programs if you're not tracking grantee performances?
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox. It is very important, as you say, to track outcomes, to make sure that we are good stewards of federal monies.
Okay, then my request should be very simple. Just hit click and send what you've got. Can you commit to providing performance information on all of ETA's discretionary grants by the end of the week?
Chairwoman Fox, it is my understanding that we have been responsive to requests from you and from this committee. If that is not the case,
well,
yes,
let
I
me
commit.
just tell you directly, your department has not been responsive. So please review our request and respond appropriately. Going forward, will you commit to posting the employment and earnings outcomes for grant programs on the department's website?
Chairwoman Fox, I'm not clear specifically on the details of what you request, but we have worked to be transparent about our grants and also about outcomes, and I agree with you that it's very important to make sure that what we're funding works.
If the letters are not clear, and I read those letters very, very carefully, as do our staff members, to make sure they're clear. But if you would simply send a response back and tell us what's not clear, we'll certainly clarify it. But we do think the letters are very clear and that the information we need is very specific. So let me switch to the wage and hour division briefly. Despite the wage and hours division nearly 10% increase in funding over the last 4 years, it collected the least amount of back wages for workers since FY 2010, down by nearly 33% from 4 years ago. The number of workers receiving back wages is the lowest on record for WHD. As I said, down by more than 51% from 4 years ago. These results are not due to a resource issue, and COVID is no longer a legitimate excuse. These failures reflect the management problem. What are you doing as a manager to fix this poor performance?
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Fox. As the Deputy Secretary of Labor, over the last 2 years, I had responsibility for management of the department and worked closely with the Wage and Hour Division to make sure that we were
we already know
performing
that.
our mission.
We already know that. So what's the solution?
So one of the things that when we came in January of 2021, the department, their enforcement resources had been cut dramatically in the prior administration, about 14%. And we have, in the time that we have been here, worked to rebuild the division, to train staff, and to make sure that we are investigating not all workplaces, right? It makes sense to be targeted and to be smart and to identify which employers are actually engaged in violations and which are not, right? The vast majority of employers are
Ms.
complying
Sue,
with the law.
you have effectively taken up a lot of my time without answering questions. So I will now yield back my time. I now recognize Mr. Courtney for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Secretary Sue, for your diligent work to really have to address, as you were just alluding, really the wreckage that took place in the prior administration. And we've seen this on this committee, unfortunately, not just in the Department of Labor, but also in the Department of Education. I'd like to just begin my 5 minutes by, again, noting the fact that the Biden economy defied all the predictions of pundits and economists on both the right and the left last Friday, when the U.S. economy added 339,000 jobs. Again, the unemployment rate stays below 4%. But even more significantly, the report indicated that the number of job openings also increased by 358,000. So we are now at a moment where there's 10.1 million job openings in the economy. At the same time, we have, again, record low unemployment. And this is really a moment for the Department of Labor to really shine, because the WIOA system, which has a dual customer approach where the two customers are both job seekers and employers, really can help close the skills gap that we know from talking to employers, and frankly, every member on both the Republican side and Democratic side, if you put them on truth serum, would say that that is the number one concern that we're hearing from employers out there, is trying to find qualified workers. In my district, again, the employer engagement has really worked very successfully for a manufacturing spike that's taking place in the Navy shipbuilding sector. Again, we developed a curriculum back in 2015 under prior Secretary of Labor, Tom Perez, and that has generated 3,000 job placements, again, using qualified instructors with the right curriculum on an accelerated basis, transforming people's lives. Can you talk about your own sort of thoughts about engaging with employers in that fashion, and really kind of sizing this success in Eastern Connecticut across the nation?
Thank you so much, Congressman, and thank you for highlighting an example of when workforce development programs work at their best. They help meet the needs of employers for a skilled workforce. They help meet the desire for individuals, for good jobs, and they help to build local, regional, and the national economy. So it's true that in this moment, I think the work of the Department of Labor really takes on an outsized importance when we have, due to the really good work of this body in partnership with the President, really historic levels of investments in manufacturing, in infrastructure, in clean energy, in bringing jobs back to the United States. And so the ability to meet, to align the needs of employers with the desire of workers, job seekers, through effective training programs has never been more important. And that, of course, starts with employers. It starts with understanding employer needs. It starts with knowing the where, when, and how of the jobs that they are creating, and then making sure that the rest of the system, right, that we have partners at the table, community colleges, four-year colleges, even K through 12 educational system, workforce training boards, community-based organizations, unions, all of the players in the economy working together to set up effective training programs. Registered apprenticeships is a very, very important part of that. I know that Chairwoman mentioned that as well. And so the Department of Labor is laser focused on making sure that our investments, our technical assistance, our support, our programs are building on the needs that employers have in this moment.
Later this week, President Biden is going to the chairwoman's state, North Carolina, to roll out the Career Connected program at the Department of Education, which Secretary Cardona was actively engaged with Secretary Walsh, because this is an all-hands-on-deck situation right now in terms of getting trade schools and comprehensive high schools, working hard to help, again, close that skills gap and to address these job openings. Again, can you talk about your willingness to, again, make this, again, a larger than just DOL, but also education initiative?
100%. So this is, as you say, all hands on deck. We talk about a whole of government approach. I actually have spoken to Secretary Cardona because this is aligning the educational system with the workforce system is absolutely critical in this moment. And especially because a lot of the jobs that we're talking about now, for example, in manufacturing, are going to be jobs that do not require a four-year degree. So how do we make sure that a young person, from the time that they're thinking about what they're going to do after high school, whether to go to community college, whether to go to a trade school, whether to go directly into an apprenticeship program, making sure that we align those systems so that people don't have to figure those out. We can help them to do that. It is so, so important, and that is reflected in our budget requests. It's reflected in the work of the department over the last 2 years, and I certainly pledge to continue the work that Secretary Walsh and I did together over the last 2 years to continue to meet that need.
Great. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you.
Mr. Wahlberg, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Acting Secretary Sue, for being here. I also want to take a note to express appreciation for my friend and colleague from Connecticut, highlighting the continuing success of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act in impacting the economy and the growth of jobs. On May 25th, Madam Secretary, I, along with Chairwoman Fox and Representative Chavez DeRemer, sent you a letter asking for specific information about migrant children who are being trafficked and working illegally in the United States. On June 2nd, the department responded with a letter that was generally unresponsive and made no attempt to provide any of the documents or communications that we requested. This lack of response, and with all due respect and without pounding the table, I frankly want to ask for your continued help in working with your staff to make sure these issues that we request are made. The issues raised in my letter are important to the committee's understanding of how DOL is assisting HHS and DHS from keeping migrant children out of harm's way. And so I'd ask you if you would commit to providing the committee with the documents we requested in that letter on May 25th, within 48 hours of the conclusion of this hearing.
Thank you very much, Congressman. I will direct my staff to work with your staff to ensure that we are responsive to your request.
Within 48 hours?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Moving forward into the department's regulatory agenda, I understand the DOL is preparing a proposed rulemaking altering the overtime regulations under the Fair Labor Standards Act. However, I'm concerned that changes at this time, with recent significant increases in inflation, lingering supply chain problems, worker shortages across the country, and a potential recession on the horizon, may be devastating to our economic recovery. Many industries are still trying to get back to pre-pandemic employment but are struggling. Considering the potential consequences of changing the regulations and the fact that the agency last updated the overtime regulations only 3 years ago, can you explain why DOL is pursuing these changes?
Thank you very much for that question, Congressman. So we take a very deliberative approach to any rulemaking that we do at the department. You are correct that there is an overtime rule on our reg agenda, and One thing that we have been doing is conducting listening sessions. We've conducted actually 27 virtual listening sessions that have involved more than 2,000 participants, because it's important to understand, exactly as you're saying, the impact of any rule that we would make on everyone who could be affected by it. At the same time, the Wage and Hour Division has conducted listening sessions in person, small business stakeholders, working with the Small Business Administration to make sure that anything that we do, we have been thoughtful, we have listened, we understand all the impacts, and that we get it right.
Along that same line, what about the fiduciary rule?
Same answer on the fiduciary rule. It is on our agenda, but we will be certain to be listening to all stakeholders, all parties. And if we're not doing enough to do outreach to let people know that we are having listening sessions, and we want we want to make sure that your constituents, that people are heard, I'm definitely committed to working with you to make sure that we're doing that outreach.
And that's a concern, that many people will lose access to common sense financial counseling at a level that they can afford and they can pay for. And
Right.
we thought we'd achieve that, so that's a concern that we're going back again into areas that frankly seem to be working.
I appreciate
Let me
that.
move on one, because my time is about out here. Acting Secretary, for decades, Michigan has had the flexibility to deliver Wagner-Pizer Act employment services through local staffing models, which has enhanced integration of workforce services at the local level. Last year, DLL proposed a rule that will strip Michigan and other states of this flexibility and force workforce staff and service reductions. With 10 million unfilled jobs, why would we do this?
Thank you, Congressman. So I can definitely have my staff get back to you with more detail about that particular issue. But as I've said, and as I commit, we are committed to and anxious to work with you and with everybody in this body to make sure that we are meeting those needs for the open jobs that are there, for the individuals who want those jobs, including those who've been left out of the economy in prior, in the past. And so to the extent that there are concerns.
I appreciate that. I just say that if it's working at the local level, the state level, getting people employed, getting them trained, let it happen. That's my request. But thank you, and I'll look forward to that information.
Thank you
I
very
yield
much,
back.
Congressman.
Thank you, Mr. Walberg. Mr. Sablon, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning and welcome, Madam Secretary. I want to first comment that, many of the work, the Biden administration through your department, the chairman noted, the ranking member noted the record-breaking employment, and added to that is the increase in real wages for workers. And those things are notable. Madam Secretary, the two jurisdictions in the United States where the Wagner-Pazer Act does not apply is in my district, the Northern Marianas and American Samoa. So I've been working on that for a while, trying to get it. I'm joined by my colleague from American Samoa. Hopefully we try and get it out this year, but we continue to welcome your department's support for that. My other issues are what related to the Commonwealth worker issues, which is a unique visa again to the Northern Mariana Islands. And so for that, may I ask for some commitment that you would have your office work with my office in getting some of these answers or getting some of these issues resolved in some way?
Yes, Congressman, thank you so much. I certainly believe that every worker should be treated with dignity and respect, and employers should receive assistance in meeting their workforce needs, including those on the Marianas Islands. Obviously, the question of whether CNMI is covered under specific federal programs is a question for Congress, but I am committed to ensuring that CNMI receives the support and funding for which it is eligible. And I understand your issue up at the CW1, and you do have my commitment that to work with you to make sure that we're doing everything we can there. And as you know, we have federal investments in apprenticeship programs on the island. We've had funding from the rescue plan on helping to shore up the unemployment insurance system, and I certainly commit to continue to work with you on all of those things.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I gotta have a lot of time pass. Is there an issue that you would like to bring up, just to inform the committee about some of the things that, you know, the department is really trying to achieve? I think if the plans, the Biden administration work plan works, this is creating the next greatest generation of Americans. Like those that ran power plants growing up and were mayors who had no degrees, no high school diplomas, and they ran communities well.
Yes.
So please.
Thank you so
You'll
much.
sit
I
up.
mean,
Thank you.
I agree with that, and I imagine this is something that every one of us would agree on, which is the opportunity to create good jobs in every single community is one that we simply cannot pass up. We are in a moment where, as an economy, we've seen record job growth. We have seen, as the ranking member mentioned, historically low levels of unemployment. And I think this is, the president has talked about what does it look like to build an industrial policy in which we really build a strong economy on good jobs that, by creating good roads and new bridges and make sure that every home has clean drinking water and that there is affordable, reliable broadband access in every single community, in rural communities, in urban communities, in big cities, in small towns, that these are also opportunities to create good jobs in those very same communities. And so the Department of Labor's work has been very laser focused on meeting those needs, on aligning those systems, on working with employers, with unions, with workers, with community-based organizations, with industry associations to make sure that we meet this moment and, the president said it, that we implement and finish the job that has been started.
Well, again, thank you for everything that you and your department does now and with Mr. Walsh in the previous, and best of luck on your new assignment, new endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman.
I yield.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sablon. Mr. Grossman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. First question I have is, there's been some publications talking about the huge number of people crossing our southern border who, you could even say, crossing our southern border on false asylum claims. A lot of these people perhaps being taken advantage of. What is your office doing to prevent people who are not in this country legally from A, maybe taking jobs away from American workers, and B, making sure that their employers are obeying all the laws, particularly with regard to age?
Thank you very much for that question, Congressman. I think one of the things you might be referring to is recently our Wage and Hour Division found a large number of children working in exploitative child labor conditions. This was a company that had hired over 100 children, ages 13 to 17, doing sanitation work, cleaning work in a meat processing facility.
Can I give you a follow-up?
Of course.
Because we only have 5 minutes. How many of these children were living with their parents?
Right, I don't have a specific number on that, but many of these children were migrant children, and as a result of
Do you look for that? I mean, when you find somebody like that, do you look for the parents?
We look for child labor violations in every case
right,
that
but
we
if
look
somebody's
at.
being taken advantage of, I would assume one of the things you do is you'd call the parents. Do you call the parents? Do you look into where the parents are?
Well, in this case, what happened, again, some of the kids were 13 years old and they were working the night shift.
Right. If I found a 13-year-old working the night shift, I'd be wanting to call their parents pretty quickly. Do you look for the parents?
Well, what we did here is the White House actually started an interagency task force that the Department of Labor leads that does include some of our sister agencies, right? Some of the questions that you're asking involve.
The question is, if you find a 13-year-old working the night shift illegally, the first thing I would do is contact the parents and find out what's going on. There has been some concern in this town about, in the last administration, children being separated from their parents, albeit relatively small compared to this sea of people who are apparently working illegally. Do you look for the parents? Do you even check it off or see whether they have parents?
Right, that's what I would say. Some of that work involves the work of other agencies in the federal government, but we do work together. This is not an answer of we're not paying attention. The interagency task force does include the Department of Homeland Security.
Is anybody checking to see whether the kids are here with their parents or whether they've been sent north by the drug cartels or what's going on?
Right, all important and relevant to the issue at hand. For the Department of Labor, our work was to make sure that
we don't really consider that a concern. Okay, next question. In 2005, you wrote that we live in a society built on white privilege and systemic racial subordination. When I look at the statistics, people come here from all around the globe, people who are not of European descent, and quite frankly, people from whose ancestors lived in China, India, Cuba, all doing better than the native born. When you look at all these groups, not of European ancestry, at least if we define doing well as financially well, it looks like again and again and again we see people coming to this country from all across the globe doing better than the native born. Now, you made that comment in 2005. We live in a society built on white privilege and systemic racial subordination. Given the successes of people of, I think Indian ancestry are the most successful in this country, but India, China, Philippines, Cuba, historically, I don't know if it's still true, but second generation from the Caribbean. Do you still stand by this idea running down America that we're a society built on white privilege?
Thank you, Congressman. The other thing I've said, and said much more recently, is that we are a nation where the American dream was available to certainly my family, right? It's not just abstract.
Do you regret saying that? It's kind of an inflammatory thing to say about our country. Do you still believe that? Will you recant that statement?
Well, I will certainly say that in all the things that we've talked about today, in the work that I've done, in my record over the last 2 years as Deputy Secretary, but also the decades before, I do believe in equal opportunity for all communities. And
yeah, I know. You made an inflammatory statement saying that our society is built on white privilege. Well, people here from all around the globe do financially better than people of European heritage. India, China, Cuba, Philippines, wherever you look, they're doing better.
Mr. Grossman, I need you to wrap up.
Okay.
Just try to get an answer.
Yep. Could you comment on that, or do you regret saying this?
I think what you're noting is that this is a nation of opportunity, and that is, I believe that. I am a product of that. I am grateful for that. And I also believe that the work of the Department of Labor is to make sure that there are opportunities for everybody who is looking for a good job. It doesn't matter, where you live or where you're from.
Thank you, Ms. Sue. Ms. Bonamici, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Acting Secretary Sue, thank you for being here. I want to start by extending my gratitude to you for your capable and steadfast leadership at the Department of Labor, your qualifications to serve in this role, and your strong record as a champion for workers and for businesses. Those are clear, and I share the sentiments of many of my colleagues on this committee in urging the Senate to quickly move forward with your confirmation. And I want to say I find your personal story very inspiring. It's my understanding that your parents had a small business, a pizza franchise, and with that, they were able to send you and your sister to college, and look how far you've come. It's a very, very inspiring story. So I've been a long time been a proponent of high-quality apprenticeship programs because we know they work. I serve as co-chair of the Bipartisan Congressional Apprenticeship Caucus, and I understand that apprenticeships are effective in building a pipeline of diverse and skilled workers with a pathway to a good-paying job, and they help businesses thrive and succeed. So I'm excited about some of the work that's happening in the district I represent in Northwest Oregon to expand opportunities. Century High School, for example, in Hillsboro, Oregon, operates the Hillsboro Advanced Manufacturing Apprenticeship. This is located in what is sometimes known as the Silicon Forest in Oregon. It's the first industry-supported youth apprenticeship program in our state, and it's a 2-year program that provides a pathway for high school students between the ages of 16 and 18 to get hands-on paid training that prepares them for a career in advanced manufacturing. So the program provides employers with skilled, diverse workforce to help our nation's competitive edge. And your leadership will make more programs like this available to more people across the country. I'm also grateful for your work with the Women's Bureau, leading to an increase in labor participation among women workers. I had the pleasure recently of meeting with Oregon Tradeswomen, which is an amazing trailblazing organization in Oregon that opens up pathways to women with careers in construction, manufacturing, mechanical, utility trades. And I know the Department of Labor and the Department of Commerce and supports the Department of Commerce and the Department of Energy in the implementation of these historic investments that we've made to grow domestic manufacturing. So I appreciate your leadership in making these pathways available to more women, getting more women in the workforce. So as this committee considers reauthorizing the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, I want to highlight the potential of sector strategies and partnerships, particularly those that link employers with community colleges and other institutions of higher education. I have another example from Oregon, the Oregon Manufacturing Innovation Center. It's a very innovative partnership between industries, universities, Portland Community College, where the university researchers and students work on industry-developed research problems, and then they provide students with hands-on experience to get the skills they need to become skilled workers. Also, Portland Community College has the Willow Creek campus. It's forged lasting relationships with Oregon-based advanced manufacturing and semiconductor companies. So there's lots of great work being done at the state level that we could replicate. And I want to ask you, Madam Acting Secretary, the Department of Labor has emphasized sector strategies as an evidence-based approach to effective training in many of its competitive grants. So the reason sector strategies are so effective is that they encourage important partnerships between community colleges, training providers, and other relevant stakeholders, much like what we've seen in Oregon. So we know that employers are vital in developing these programs, but they could use some assistance in creating and maintaining the partnerships. So what are sector strategies? Why are they so effective? And what is the Department of Labor doing and continuing to do to apply this evidence-based approach in its grants and its work?
Congresswoman, thank you so much. I don't think I could more effectively describe the benefits of training programs and workforce partnerships that really work than you have just done. So I really, really appreciate that. As you've said, I think that partnerships are really critical to delivering on the really important need and opportunity we have right now to connect people, including people who've been left out of good jobs in the past, right? You mentioned to the extent that there are jobs in which women have been underrepresented but could do them, right? I've met with women across the country who, when given a chance to lay pipe 30 feet underground or work in the construction trades, not only do an amazing job, but find their own pathway to the middle class and lift up their entire families. So all of these things, I think, need to happen in partnership. And I do believe that the Department of Labor's role is to help to solidify those partnerships, to bring people together. That's partly why our funding is, specifically our sector-based funding, is about that. And you talk about apprenticeships. Apprenticeships are one key tool within those partnerships also. And as you've said, apprenticeships are a proven, tried and true model. The average starting wage after completing a registered apprenticeship is $77,000. And people who finish registered apprenticeship programs earn an average of $300,000 more over their career compared to their peers who do not. So this is not just a job, it's actually a life-changing opportunity.
And I hope you get an opportunity, if you haven't already, to meet with Oregon tradeswomen. It's very inspiring. Thank you. I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Allen, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Madam Acting Secretary, for being here this morning. The first question, you're going to need to answer that in writing to the committee, but we had Chairman Powell come and talk about, the situation with interest rates and the economy. And he said their responsibility was full employment and obviously inflation below 2%. And he says we're at full employment. And then I said, well, sir, do you know that the current work participation rate is about 62%, which is the lowest it's been in some 20-something years? And he said, well, that's not my job, that's your job. So as members of Congress, we've got to figure out what's going on in the workforce out there, because right now, we have, we had a high in 2002 of almost 70% worker participation. And if you do the math, that's about 10 million people. We can't figure out where they are. So could your department do a study and find out where these people are and why they're not working or given the opportunity to work, so that we can train those folks up and give them that great dignity and respect they deserve in a good job so that they can live the American dream? Secondly, moving on to environmental social governance factors. When making investment decisions, your department had a rule, and that is precisely why Congressman Barr and I last Congress introduced the Ensuring Sound Guidance Act to ensure retirement account managers consider only monetary factors and returns when making decisions on behalf of their clients, unless otherwise authorized. We are currently in the process of reintroducing a version of that bill this Congress. Yes or no? Should maximizing assets for retirement be a pension plan's top priority? Do you agree?
Congressman, thank you very much. I do agree that after a worker has worked a lifetime and saved for retirement, that they should expect to be able to maximize those savings.
Okay. Okay, well then, can you deal with that rule? Before the department published the final ESG rule last year, the Employment Benefits Security Administration stated in March 2021 that the department's rationale for undertaking a new rule was based on private meetings in which unnamed parties expressed perceived confusion about the 2020 rules and how to interpret them. This means the department based its decision to rescind and revise ESG rules behind closed doors. Why were these meetings held in private and not in the public? Why were the attendee names and dates of these meetings not disclosed?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. I'm not actually aware of private meetings that were undisclosed. I said earlier that...
Okay, can you get back with me on that? And can you investigate that and have someone in your organization look into it and get back to me on why exactly that happened?
I will,
and
sir.
for the benefit of the committee. Will you commit to providing the committee with a list of all attendee names and dates of all the meetings regarding the November 2022 ESG rulemaking process within 30 days of this hearing?
Thank you very much, Congressman.
Yes or no? Will you do that?
Well, I will certainly, what I said earlier about our rulemaking...
Okay, send me a letter on why you can't do that, and then we'll deal with it.
Okay, I just want to be clear,
we all
though,
know that keeping retirement plan costs low is an important part of ensuring that as many Americans as possible can achieve a secure retirement. However, instead of bolstering retirement accounts for Americans, your recent proposed amendments to the long-standing exemption for qualified professional asset managers would impose significant new costs on our retirement system and, by extension, American workers and retirees. In fact, I've heard many concerns from stakeholders that the department's amendments to this 40-year policy will have negative impacts on workers, retirees, plan sponsors, unions, and financial institutions. Has the department done, or will you commit to doing, a detailed and realistic cost-benefit analysis of these proposed amendments that reflect input from stakeholders? Will you do this?
Congressman, our ESG rule did not require financial advisors to do anything in particular. What it did was give them the flexibility.
So you don't do cost-benefit analysis?
No, what it does is allow financial advisors...
Do you know what cost-benefit analysis is?
I do. I guess I'm clarifying what the rule actually was. It wasn't a requirement. It was basically allowing financial advisors to take into account whatever factors in order to do what you've said, which I agree with, which is that we should maximize the retirement savings.
Get back with me on that, too. I'm out of time. Madam Chair, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Ms. McBath, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Acting Secretary Sue. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here today and for your strong history of fighting to ensure that every American has access to good-paying jobs and to support themselves and their families. One of the things I hear most about when folks are coming up to D.C. or when I'm back home in Georgia is about workforce shortages. I hear that again and again and again and again. And whether you're building a hospital or trying to find the nurses and support staff to take care of the patients who'll be treated there, there's a serious disconnect between the good careers that are available in today's economy and the skills that are needed to perform these jobs. Courses like the Inside Wireman Telecommunications and Construction Electrician programs offered at the Atlanta JATC Electrical Training Center in Peachtree Corners, which is my district in Georgia, they actually pay their students to learn. Instead of being forced to take out thousands of dollars in loans to better themselves through education, they are being paid a decent wage and given room to grow while they obtain the skills necessary to move their families and our country forward. Secretary Sue, it's clear that we need to be doing more to get Americans into these careers so that we can see the full benefit of our bipartisan investments through the infrastructure package and the CHIPS and the Science Act that were signed into law by President Biden. What has the DOL done under your leadership to support and encourage workforce development programs? You've spoken most candidly about that. I want to give you more time to expand upon that. And are there particular programs that you would like to highlight for us at this time?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman, for that question and also for highlighting other examples of how the workforce system at its best does its work. I think one of the things that your example highlights too, and this relates to a question that was asked from the other side of the dais, which is, how are we lifting up the ideas, the innovation of local communities, right? Much of workforce development works best when it is place-based, when it's meeting specific needs in communities. And we have seen our job at the Department of Labor as helping to support those kinds of innovations on the ground. Our sector-based investments are very much about that. It's about supporting employers coming together in their communities with other workforce partners to design training programs that are going to meet their needs. It's about working with employers to signal and forecast what the jobs that they're creating are going to be. That is the best and most effective way to activate the rest of the system, right? To get community colleges to make sure that their curriculum and their offerings are responsive to actual jobs that people can get after they complete any kind of program. I think that we build credibility in the system also when we say at the outset, this program is going to lead to an actual job at the end at the end of your training. And so we have invested in sector-based partnerships. We have also been working to meet needs that are well documented now for in certain industries. Many of them were devastated by the pandemic. So nursing, for example, right? I think in every community there's a need to build our nursing workforce. They did heroic work. And we need to invest back in them. And so the Department of Labor has a $80 million funding announcement for nurses. We also know, this is where, really understanding what the problem is to address it is important, that the issue is not just having enough nurses, it's also having enough clinical instructors so that nurses can get the clinical hours that they need before they go to work. So our funding announcement is meant to incentivize both of those paths.
Thank you. I have one more question to ask you, though.
Please.
Registered apprenticeships are a key component of workforce development, and they provide a clear path to good-paying jobs. We know that. We know this has worked. What has the department done to encourage registered apprenticeships? And so we're clear, registered apprenticeships are not just restricted to union jobs. Am I correct?
That is 100% correct, Congresswoman. In fact, the majority of apprenticeships that we have supported, that Department of Labor registered apprenticeships in the last year have not been with union employers. But we have been doing work, for example, in cybersecurity, right? That is a growing industry of good jobs. And one of the things that we did is in a 4-month period, we were able to begin and support enough programs to put 16,000 new apprentices in the cybersecurity industry. Again, many of those, all of them private sector and many of them non-union jobs. We also in trucking, right? Everyone has talked about the supply chain challenges, and trucking is one of them. In a 3-month period, we worked with over 700 employers and industry associations to set up trucking apprenticeships. And what we have seen in doing that is that we can, again, both solve supply chain
Thank you,
issues
Madam
and good jobs
Secretary.
issues.
I think you can submit those things in
Thank you.
writing.
Thank you.
Mr. Banks, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Acting Secretary, a New York Times story, April 17, 2023, headline says, as migrant children were put to work, the U.S. ignored warnings. The White House and federal agencies were reportedly alerted to signs of children at risk. The warnings were ignored or missed. It goes on and says thousands of children have ended up in punishing jobs across the country, working overnight in slaughterhouses, replacing roofs, operating machineries in factories, all in violation of child labor laws, a recent New York Times investigation showed. I think you know by now, reportedly hundreds of thousands of illegal children have entered our workforce in dangerous jobs. And this story says that you and this administration have completely ignored what I believe is another example of the biggest humanitarian crisis in American history. What the heck are you doing about it?
Thank you, Congressman, for that. So you're right that we're talking about children doing jobs that are highly dangerous, that it's illegal for children to be working. We're not talking about a young person trying to get their first experience working at the local convenience store, right? Learning how to show up on time and manage a budget.
Acting Secretary, this story says you ignored this issue. I know you just said I'm right, but why is your department ignoring hundreds of thousands of children illegally in the workplace working in unsafe conditions? What are you doing about it?
Thank you, Congressman, for that. You're right. Let me be pointed about this. So I don't believe the story said that the Department of Labor was not doing what we need to do. In fact, I believe the stories came out because the Department of Labor was doing our job. We investigated a case that involved over 100 young people, as young as 13, working exactly in the conditions that you've talked about.
Ma'am, the policies of this administration, opening the border wide open, has resulted in hundreds of thousands of migrant children entering the workforce in America in unsafe conditions. In fact, one lawyer, Linda Brandmiller, said that there were so many opportunities for the Biden administration to connect these dots that no one ever did. I mean, the question is, why didn't you do anything about it? I mean, you come before this committee today and tell me that you agree with me, but what are you doing about it? What is the all-hands-on-deck moment in your department to take care of this issue?
I agree that children doing that work is horrific. This is also related to our budget request, which is to make sure that the Department of Labor has the resources to investigate all the cases. But the reason that those cases are in the news...
The Trump administration was night and day different on this than your administration. In fact, since the Biden administration started, we've seen a 69% increase in child labor violations because of the open border policies that have flooded this country, in this case with reportedly over 250,000 kids coming into our country, entering unsafe conditions. And I'm glad you're here to tell us that you agree with me, but I don't think the New York Times even says that you're ignoring it. In fact, let me go on, because this is, it's really incredible. Secretary Mayorkas in April was asked before the Homeland Security Committee in the Senate about this catastrophe. And you know what he said? He shifted the blame. He said, it's your fault. He said, this problem is your fault, the Department of Labor's fault. Is he right about that?
Sir, I agree that children should not be doing these kinds of jobs, and I agree that we should do everything we can within our, it is our responsibility as the Department of Labor to crack down on child labor by doing investigations and making sure that employers who profit from this kind of labor are held accountable. That is what we did in the case, the PSSI case is probably the one that's in that news article, because that is the case that helped to bring this issue to light, and I think it's a positive thing that we are talking about this issue to
Madam
try
Chair,
to crack
I'd like
down.
to enter this New York Times story for the record.
The other thing, Congressman, just so you know, is
Madam
that,
Chair, I'd like to
sorry.
enter the New York Times story for the record. My last question for you, Acting Secretary. How closely do you work with ICE on issues like this?
So there's an interagency task force now that's been created that the Department of Labor leads because of our leadership in investigating these cases. It does include the Department of Homeland Security. It includes our partners at the Health and Human
Is
Services.
there a role
It
here
is
for ICE working with the Department of Labor to enforce child labor laws?
I'm sorry,
Is
Congressman, I
there
missed the beat.
a role between your department and ICE to?
So this task force is meant to make sure that we have an all-hands-on-deck approach so that children are not working in such horrific conditions.
My time has
So-
expired, but Madam Chair, I'd like to also enter for the record a memo that the Acting Secretary drafted July 7th, 2017, instructing in her previous role in the state of California for her employees to obstruct the law and not work with ICE. There's no reason for us to believe that today that she would work with ICE in her current role. This is a catastrophe unlike anything that we've seen, a humanitarian catastrophe that unlike anything that we've ever seen in American history because of this administration. I yield back.
Without objection, that will be entered into the record. Dr. Adams, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Secretary, thank you, Acting Secretary, thank you for being here to discuss the fiscal year 2024 budget. It's good to see you again. According to one study by RAND, for every dollar spent on reentry programs, taxpayers recoup $4 to $5 in just 3 years after program completion. These savings come from the reduction in recidivism and increased participation in the job market, which leads to higher income and sales tax revenue. So can you tell me a little bit about DOL's work in retraining programs?
Thank you very much for that, Congresswoman. You're absolutely right that investments in individuals who have great promise and talent are really important to make sure that they can contribute that and help to fill the labor needs that we have. Our Employment and Training Administration, or ETA, that administers workforce grants, has made this a priority under my leadership and that of then Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh, and we will continue to do so to ensure that when we talk about building this economy from the bottom up to the middle out and leave no one behind, that includes communities who are reentering.
Great, thank you. I'm sure that you are just as devastated as I am about the recent reports regarding exploiting child labor and the apparent drastic increase in child labor violations. Corporations should not be making profits off the backs of children, and children don't belong in factories or working during hours where they should be studying or spending time with their families or just simply being children. The FLSA provides critical protections for minors to ensure that they're working in safe and appropriate environments. The case that the Department of Labor brought against Packard Sanitation Services, which resulted in PSSI paying the maximum fines available for employing at least 102 children in hazardous conditions, it's a vivid illustration of just how seriously DOL takes this issue. So can you please describe the steps that you've taken to combat child labor?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. So, yes, we take combating exploitive child labor very seriously. In all of the cases that we have, we look to make sure that there isn't exploitive child labor happening. Again, to be clear, we're not talking about a young person getting their first summer job, right? Trying to, earn some money and learn what it means to be in the workplace. We're talking about workers working with toxic chemicals and heavy machinery and going to work at night after going to school during the day. And so we look for cases, we cite employers who engage in child labor. As you mentioned, in that case, which was the subject of the New York Times and other reports, We issued the maximum penalty. Now that penalty, the maximum penalty is set in law under the Fair Labor Standards Act by Congress, but we also appreciate the attention of this body to looking at whether those penalties need to be increased. And we've been happy to partner with you to provide technical assistance on that. We currently have over 500 child labor investigations underway in addition to that one, and we continue to field complaints and initiate investigations. In the last fiscal year, the department found 835 companies that it had investigated had employed children in violation of labor laws. So this is a real issue. We are paying close attention to it. That's one reason why there's growing attention to it. And I'm hopeful that between our work and our budget request and the public attention that it's getting, that we might be able to make real strides in stopping the scourge that is very harmful, not just to young people, but also to employers who actually play by the rules.
Thank you for that question. Let me ask you something about workforce development and how WIOA funding has positively impacted workforce development, and what has been the impact of the WIOA on people of color in this country?
Thank you for that question, Congresswoman. So WIOA, which I think is something that enjoys bipartisan support, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, does fund workforce programs. And many of the programs that we've talked about are avenues for advancing equity, for making sure that every single community has the opportunity to participate in training programs and to get the good jobs that are being created.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Mr. Owens, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to extend my time to Mr. Kiley.
Mr. Kiley, you're recognized.
Good morning, Acting Secretary Sue. Good to have you here. Just to make sure I have your background correct, you were the Secretary of the Labor and Workforce Development Agency in California from 2019 to 2021?
Correct.
And you were the California Labor Commissioner from 2011 to 2018?
Correct.
So in your Senate testimony in April, you touted President Biden's economic record. You said the results speak for themselves. And you specifically cited the unemployment rate. You said it's been less than 4% for more than a year, which is close to the lowest it's been in 50 years. Do you happen to know how your home state of California is doing when it comes to the unemployment rate there versus other states?
Thank you very much, Congressman. I don't know what the current unemployment rate in California is.
So according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, California currently has the second highest unemployment rate in the nation. Does that sound right?
I don't know. I trust that you have that correct.
So if a low unemployment rate, by your own testimony, is a sign of good economic stewardship, what does it tell us about California that it has the nation's second highest unemployment rate?
So thank you very much for that question, Congressman. You are correct that we share a home state and that I was the labor secretary for from 2019 to 2021, and prior to that, the labor commissioner, where my job was to enforce wage and hour laws in workplaces.
Right, we've established that. So the question about the unemployment rate, which by the way was similar during your tenure, 2020, 2021, California was first, second, or third highest unemployment rate in the country. So you yourself have said at a low unemployment rate says we're doing a good job. What does it mean that California has a high unemployment rate?
I think, Congressman, we would likely agree that there are lots of measures of what makes a strong economy, and there's lots of ways to look at, obviously it makes sense for us to try to address high unemployment, because having people who are looking for jobs be able to do jobs, and having people who are in jobs be able to upskill and get to better jobs is a goal that I know we share, but I don't think it's...
Let's talk about a couple other measures. You said in your testimony in April, too many people still work full-time year-round and live in poverty. According to the latest Census Bureau data, the supplemental poverty measure, do you happen to know which state has the highest real poverty rate in the country?
I don't know that, sir.
It actually happens to be California. And do you happen to know, according to a recent report from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, where California ranks when it came to net earnings growth this last year?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
California was 50th out of 50. So if our goals are to reduce unemployment, reduce poverty, and to increase wages, is California really the best model, given that it is the absolute worst in the country of the 50 states by all of these measures?
Again, Congressman, I think that there are lots of measures for for how well an economy is doing. My understanding, and I haven't worked in California now for 2 years, but is that by some measures, including recovery from the pandemic, including decrease in poverty over the last few years, recovering since the pandemic, that California has
Okay, I just want to reiterate, though, these were the very measures that you yourself cited in your own testimony. And your state of California, where you led the Labor Department, is doing the worst in the country. So let's move on to AB 5, which is a law that you were charged with enforcing in California. Were you involved, now I know you weren't in the legislature, but were you involved in the drafting of AB 5, including any conversations with the author or the interest groups that helped draft it?
Thank you, Congressman. As I think it has been established, and as you know, I was never part of the California legislature.
Right, as I just said. But were you involved in any way in the drafting of AB 5?
I did not draft AB 5.
Were you involved in any way in the drafting of it?
No, sir.
Did you support the law?
Well, my job as Labor Secretary was to enforce the laws that were passed by the legislature. It's the same role I have.
I understand that, but did you
here.
ever express support for AB 5?
I expressed the need to enforce laws that are passed by the legislature, and that is the
Sure, but
same
my
thing
question
that
was,
we've done.
did you express support specifically for AB 5 at any time?
I may have, sir. I know we're talking a lot about what I did in California.
You may have. Do you think it was a good law, AB 5?
Do I think AB 5 was a good law? I think that it is both my job now as the acting Secretary of Labor and the job of that I had in California as the Labor Secretary and the Labor Commissioner to enforce laws that are passed
Right, but
by
that's
the
not what I asked.
legislature.
What I asked was, do you think AB 5 is a good law?
I don't know what, I mean, I don't know, tell me what, give me a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Do you think it was a good law for the state? Is it good that it passed?
I think that, when AB 5 was first signed, one of the things that I did in my role as Labor Secretary in California was create a we reached out to employers and worked with
My time
the
here is running out.
chamber.
I just want to give you one last chance, Acting Secretary Sue. Is AB 5 a good law, yes or no?
I think it's an important role of the government to help employers to comply with laws
Yes
that
or
are
no?
passed by the legislature.
Is AB 5 a good law?
But also it's important to enforce laws that are passed.
I
yield
don't
back.
think,
was our
Mr.
charge.
Kiley, that you're going to get the witness to answer truthfully. I now recognize Mr. Takano for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Acting Secretary Sue, welcome. It's great to see you again. And I'm proud to be among the members of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus who sent a letter to President Biden in February urging him to nominate you as Labor Secretary. I ask unanimous consent to enter that letter into the record, Madam Chair.
Without objection.
I'd also like to highlight a letter that was sent this very morning, led by the chairs of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and Democratic Women's Caucus, urging Senate leadership to swiftly confirm Ms. Sue. The letter ended up with 71 signers. I ask unanimous consent to enter this letter into the record, Madam Chair. Madam Chair.
Without objection.
And furthermore, the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce has voiced their support for Ms. Sue's nomination as Labor Secretary. I ask unanimous consent for this letter to be entered into the record, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
you
sir.
do. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Acting Secretary, as you know, we had a Workforce Protection Subcommittee hearing that addressed the Labor Department's proposed rule on the misclassification of workers as independent contractors. From what I understand, no one objected much to what was in the proposed rule because it was so reasonable. Many business groups now expressing opposition to your nomination issued statements saying that your department was the direction that your department was taking with this rule was very reasonable. Now, first, does the proposed rule from the Biden administration on misclassification adopt the ABC test?
Thank you very much for that question, Congressman, and thank you for the support of KPAC. It has been very meaningful. No, the proposed independent contractor rule of the Department of Labor does not include the ABC test.
Thank you. In fact, the proposed rule even says, does it not, on page 62,230 of the Federal Register notice that, quote, the department continues to believe that legal limitations prevent the department from adopting the ABC rule or the ABC test. Is that correct?
It is correct, Congressman, that we were very explicit that we could not, as the Department of Labor, apply an ABC test, that only Congress could do that.
Well, thank you. And am I correct that the position of the department is that you cannot adopt the ABC test unless Congress passes a law enabling you to do that?
That is correct.
Thank you. And do you believe that the constitutional order of separation of powers means that the department may only implement rules that are consistent with the laws that Congress passes?
Yes, sir.
Is it true that instead of an ABC test, the proposed rule implements what is called the economic realities test? Is that right?
That is correct, Congressman.
And this economic reality test is consistent with decades of federal precedent under both Republican and Democratic administrations. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, as previously noted, the DOL proposed rule is not the ABC test. Lyft and the International Franchise Association, two of the largest entities most vocal in their opposition to the ABC test, even came out with their own statements when the proposed rule was released. Lyft unequivocally stated that the rule did not reclassify Lyft drivers as employees and that their business model would not be forced to change. The International Franchise Association statement about DOL's proposed rule applauded the proposal and expressed recognition that the ABC test does not apply to the FLSA. I ask unanimous consent for these statements to be entered into the record, Madam Chair.
Without objection.
These very companies themselves that were most vocal against the ABC test are expressing praise for the DOL proposed rule. Democrats are not the only ones praising this rule. Now, I've heard a lot of fear-mongering from my colleagues, Republican colleagues, about your role with AB 5 in California after it was passed by the state legislature and signed by the governor. So, Acting Secretary Sue, yes or no, did you serve in the California state legislature?
I did not, Congressman.
And yes or no, was the California state legislature the branch of the state government that passed AB 5?
Yes, it was.
And were you, where were you when this state law was passed?
I was serving as the California Labor Secretary.
And yes or no, were you legally required to implement this law as State Secretary of Labor once it was enacted?
Yes, I was, sir.
Thank you, Acting Secretary Sue. It's outrageous and desperate that my Republican colleagues are firing baseless attacks from you, trying to get your opinion about the law and was it a good law or a bad law. They're failing in their attempt to try and mischaracterize you. Acting Secretary, you spent your whole life fighting to improve the lives of working people. And as the daughter of immigrants, you represent the best in us. And the story that your mother coming to the United States on a cargo ship because she could not afford a passenger ticket, and now her daughter is up for Senate confirmation, truly represents the American dream. I'm so proud of you. I appreciate your being with us today and look forward to you being confirmed Secretary of Labor. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Ticano. I'm proud of you for getting the Secretary to be able to say the word yes again. Mr. Smucker, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for this time, and thank you for holding the hearing today. And Acting Secretary Sue, thank you for being here today as well. We have 10 million unfilled jobs in our economy today. Every business owner I talk to, it's the number one issue. I'm sure you're aware of that. And so I have supported, believe we should be doing everything we can to connect people not participating in the workforce with the jobs that are available today. One policy that I was particularly concerned by was the department's final rule in 2022 ending the industry-recognized apprenticeship program, which your department justified by saying it no longer believes the skills gap to be a major challenge facing the labor market. Why that comment? Why would the department be undermining the seriousness of the skills gap, and what employers have you spoken to that indicated the shortage of skilled workers is not a major challenge?
Thank you very much for that question, Congressman. We have been working very closely with all stakeholders, but employers as well, to, as you say, meet the need for skilled workers in the jobs are being created in every community, in manufacturing and clean energy, in infrastructure and more. We are also very committed to, outside of these big investments that this body, in working with the president, has made possible, really committed to helping to rebuild the workforce in place in like teachers, right, and healthcare workers, and I already mentioned truckers, and also in other jobs that have historically not had apprenticeship programs like cybersecurity. So that's all work that we have been laser focused on over the last 2 years when I served as deputy secretary, and we will continue to do that work.
Could you specifically address your opposition to the industry recognized apprenticeship programs?
I think one of the things that we need to do and have been doing is to make it easier for employers who want to have a registered apprenticeship program to do so. And we have done that. I've talked about trucking earlier, but it used to take months for an employer who wanted to do a trucking apprenticeship to do one. It's now a matter of days. We have expanded teacher apprenticeships, but used to be in only 2 states in 2021 to now 17 states across the country. These are registered apprenticeships, which means that they have the quality, the wage progression, right? All the benefits that make apprenticeship programs so good for both employers and for workers. And we need to make it easier for employers who want to do that to do it.
We should make it as easy as possible, and I think that was a model that could potentially have worked well with your support. I do want to get to another issue, though. President Biden has said that he intends to be the most pro-union president in history, has pursued policies that benefit union workers, which is fine, except they're to the detriment of all other workers in some cases. For example, through regulations on federal procurement and provisions in federally assisted grant programs, the administration has promoted project labor agreements on construction projects. POAs limit the pool of qualified bidders to unionized contractors and union labor, which increases costs. Anytime you're decreasing supply, you're going to see higher costs. But it also limits job opportunities for non-union construction workers. You, Acting Secretary, have an obligation to support all American workers, regardless of their labor affiliation. Will you commit to opposing these exclusionary policies that harm the 88.3% of construction workers who choose not to join a union?
I certainly, Congressman, commit to supporting and serving workers regardless of their union affiliation.
Will you support to not implementing project labor agreements on any federal projects?
Well, I think that some of those project labor agreements are written into statute, into the bipartisan infrastructure law that, again, was passed by Congress. I see my job as having full fidelity to the law as this body passes them, the law as courts interpret them. I think there's also studies that demonstrate that project labor agreements actually decrease costs over time because it assures a reliable workforce that is trained, and that the outcome, fewer disruptions, that the outcomes are more reliable.
I think the studies show just the opposite, but we unfortunately are out of time, but would love to have your support to ensure that all workers, whether they've chosen to be part of a union or not, can have access to these jobs that are available for federal projects. I think it's important. It's certainly important in the area that I represent, where I've seen workers excluded through these agreements.
Thank you, Mr. Smucker. Mr. DeSagne, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Acting Secretary, it's really delightful to see you, and I just want to tell you how proud I am of you. Your dignity and grace today just reconfirms, if I can use that language, my history with you. Your intelligence, your competency is on display here today, and it would be a really sad state for this country and this Congress if you're not confirmed, given your qualifications and your presence here today. Been some talk about California. I was not in the legislature when AB 5 was passed, but I was the former chair of the Senate Labor Committee when we did much of the groundwork for that, when we were trying to work with the private sector. And as somebody from the Bay Area, we wanted to work with the tech industry to understand what the proper classification was and not have people take advantage of that. And I say this as a long-time, 35 years, California small business owner who's made hundreds of payrolls. and always respected my employees, that we were trying to get this right, but I had to compete against employers who didn't play by the rules, including hiring people illegally. And we did work about that, holding employers who are flouting the laws, and you were part of that discussion, accountable for hiring people who shouldn't have been hired, who I had to compete with. So the numbers about unemployment tell one part of the story, and the unemployment rate in California, there's a big spike because of the tech industry. I would argue they were taking advantage under the guise of innovation, and there's a correction right now. But in the context of numbers, data from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis shows that California has the highest GDP in the nation at around $3.5 trillion. And apart from the inevitable decline during the early days of COVID, California's economy only grew during your time as Secretary of California Labor and Workforce Development. Isn't that right?
Again, Congressman, I'm not familiar exactly with that, but I trust that you have your facts correct.
It's right. We clearly didn't coordinate these questions. In fact, during your tenure as Secretary of California from 2008 through 2020, total growth in employment outpaced national employment, total growth. Median household income, which is particularly important given our inequality, increased faster over nearly 10 years than it did nationally. Real gross domestic product in California rose by 30% to $2.7 billion, nearly double the amount by which national GDP rose during that same time period, which was 16.5 nationally. An analysis by Bloomberg News, quote, California's gross domestic product increased 21% during the past 5 years, dwarfing number 2, New York, 14%, California, 21%, New York at 14%, and number 3, Texas at 12%. Among the 5 largest economies, California outperforms the US, Japan, Germany, with a growth rate exceeded only by China, and California, if it was a country, would be the 4th largest economy in the world. We far exceed every other state in patents and innovation. This economic success has followed you to the White House. Since you've been at the Department of Labor, the economy has added more jobs than during any other entire administration in recent memory, and we're not even halfway through the first term. What policies of the Biden administration have you led that have helped lead to these levels of job creation and our national unemployment rate hitting historic lows?
Thank you very much, Congressman, for your question. As has been said here, the last 2 years under the Biden-Harris administration have seen record growth in multiple measures of a healthy economy and defied multiple expectations. At the Department of Labor, our role is incredibly important in a moment where we both have job growth and economic recovery on the one hand, and needing to connect people to good jobs and employers to the workers they need, as well as to make sure that every worker works in a healthy and safe environment and goes home safely at the end of the day and gets the wages that they're earned. Those are the fundamental responsibilities of the Department of Labor. And over the last 2 years as Deputy Secretary, working alongside Marty Walsh, we worked very hard to do all of those things to fulfill our mission, to make sure that we were helping to rebuild the unemployment insurance system coming out of the ashes of the pandemic, making sure that we are investing in innovative, place-based, sector-specific training programs that are going to meet employer needs and meet worker needs, expanding apprenticeships, as I've already mentioned, and working hand in hand with employers and workers to help to take advantage of these very historic investments that are being made to rebuild our economy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Proud of you.
Thank you, Mr. DeSagne. Ms. McLean, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here today. I have some pretty easy questions, I think. Real simply, you're driving the bus, right? You're the acting Secretary of Labor, right? So I think it's important for everyone to understand your thought process. Simply put, do you support the United States free market economy?
Yes, I think in general, yes.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Do you believe an American entrepreneur should have the ability to pursue their dreams and ambitions?
Yes, I do.
Wonderful. Good. So far, we're good. Do you believe it's the responsibility of the Department of Labor to make it easier or more difficult for entrepreneurs to flourish?
I think that it makes sense for the Department of Labor to help support entrepreneurs, people who, who want to use their innovation.
We are
and
3
their talent.
for 3, so I'll take that as a yes. Thank you, ma'am. So then I want to highlight your record and try to understand then why President Biden thinks you're the best option as the next Secretary of Labor with yeses on my last 3 questions. As the Secretary in Labor in California, you oversaw the highly controversial AB 5 that reclassified every independent contractor, very entrepreneurial in spirit, in the state, and effectively killed off the gig economy in California. If you're confirmed as Secretary of Labor, will you demand that Congress pass a similar bill to kill off independent contractors?
So thank you very much for that question, Congresswoman. I would dispute that the gig economy has been killed off in California.
Okay, let's get back to the, if you are confirmed as the Secretary of Labor, will you demand Congress pass a similar bill to kill off independent contractor and the independent contractor status?
I will not do that.
Wonderful. We are on a roll. Do you believe the death of the gig industry economy is a positive or negative economy, is negative to the economy? I think we might have a difference here.
Well, so thank you, Congresswoman. I believe that we should support job growth, job creation, businesses who create jobs, and make sure that we are both paving, a high road to an economy where everybody who wants to work has a good job, they can live a middle-class life. Right, exactly, has opportunity. I also believe, and it is partly my job to make sure that we are enforcing labor laws so that everybody competes on a level playing field, and that some of the things we've talked about today, that we don't have exploitative child labor.
Thank you. Last week, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled 8-1 on an 8-1 vote that organized labor cannot damage employer property during work action. 8-1. Do you agree that union members, or any employees for that matter, have the right to damage the property of their employers?
No, I don't think there's a right to damage. I do think that
Wonderful.
the Supreme
Thank
Court's...
you. In your written testimony to the Senate Help Committee in April, you highlighted the fact that you were heavily involved with the negotiations between the rail employers and their unionized employees. Are you truly proud of the work that you did on that?
I am, Congresswoman.
Because let me remind you, Congress had to step in to prevent a national shutdown of the rail system. So, in conclusion, I'm concerned with your past actions and the rhetoric, because we can say one thing, but our actions have to follow our words. And that's what's important for the American people. I can see why there is a bipartisan group of senators who really are opposed to your nomination, because your actions don't match your words. Throughout your career, you have shown a deep disdain for businesses and employers. And let's not forget that it's the businesses and the employers that pay the taxes, and it's our economic systems that give us our social programs that we all so desperately need. In my opinion, if you truly cared about the workers, you'd be supportive of the policies that actually grow business. See, we have to incentivize businesses. Small businesses, we have to incentivize entrepreneurs to be able to work and do their jobs, right? And I want to talk about one other thing that we talk about. We continue to talk about job creation and job growth. But if we start at a 10, and then we lose jobs to a 2, and we grow from 2 to 5, we're still down. So it's the bottom line that counts, provided we know how to count. And that's what we need to focus on, is we have to take a look at the total job growth in the economy, because the people in my district are constantly talking about how regulations in the Department of Labor are stunting their growth. And if you truly cared about workers, you'd be supportive of the policies that actually grow the business jobs in our economy. And if I had to vote on your nomination, I got to be honest, I'd give a no. I'd vote no. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Norcross, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ms. Sue, it's great to have you here today. I'd like to talk a little bit about where we've been and where we are going. I proudly talk about I went from steel tips to wing tips, having gone to that other four-year school, which is called an apprenticeship. The one that I went to was part of the system that is the most successful job training program in the history of the United States. It's called a Registered Apprenticeship Program. I'm sure you're well aware of that. It taught me those necessary skills not only to be a successful electrician, but it also created an opportunity for a great career and the ability to feed my family, to take care of them. The construction industry is a great example of the most successful program, which takes little, if any, money for that training program. They take care of themselves. So I heard a lot about the industry-recognized apprenticeships. There is nothing that prevents any company from creating their own apprenticeship program, is it? They're allowed at any moment to create it. There is no stopping it. You can do it yourself, unless you want the government to pay you to do it. And that's the big difference, is we want your money, but we don't want any kind of regulations on it. Even though registered apprenticeship programs have been seen and have been the experience of the most successful program. I believe that if private industry wants to create it, they can go do it. But if you want the government to pay you to do it, there are certain conditions, which are something called checks and balances and oversight. So somebody that's been involved with that, not only in California, but when you were approved by the Senate for the seat that you used to as deputy, which you were approved by the Senate, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Tell me about the registered programs. You asked for $335 million for these programs. Why are they successful, and what are you going to do with that money if it is approved?
Thank you very much, Congressman. I think they are successful because they are built in partnership. As you mentioned, many of them are in construction, electricians, right? We are facing a growth in the need for electricians for lots of the investments that are being made right now. And having programs that are tried and true, that are based in skills that are really needed for the job, and have the ability to recruit participants so that we can meet the actual in-demand needs that employers have is baked into how apprenticeship programs work. And that's why they're so successful, because they are built from in-demand jobs. They are built on skills that are really needed. There's the guarantee of a job at the end of a training program. And so, that's why we spent so much time talking about it here, and why the Department of Labor is so invested in helping to expand them to meet the needs that we do here, that employers have and that workers have for good jobs and good workers.
So the idea of a registered program, and let's, for example, an electrician, the electrons in New Jersey work the same thing they do in California. And registered programs create standards. And why is that so important? When storms hit Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, and they rip down all the power poles, there's something called storm break, where line persons from all over the country come together to put it back together. The idea of having separate programs not only leads to problems in the construction, well, the highest incidence of death on the job years ago before the programs were brought together. This is something that we as a country do each and every day. So the register side of that program is absolutely imperative. And to do so otherwise would be risking people's lives. But the idea of a program by an employer for a unique and new program that they might be doing, I don't think I've heard that that's a bad idea. In fact, they're approved at a very high rate. Can you just talk about what it takes to get a registered program? We hear how hard it is, but quite frankly, when I talk to the employers, it's not a big deal.
I'm so happy to hear that, Congressman, because one of the things that we've been very focused on is working with employers to meet their needs, to make sure that we are not only continuing to scale apprenticeship programs that we know already work, but to help build new ones for employers who are interested in doing so and to cut the amount of time and the red tape that it takes to do that.
Yeah, because the electric car wasn't around back when I started my apprenticeship, and the idea of what it's going to take to assemble the new batteries with new chemicals is something that everybody is open to. Look, the way we're going to do this is working together with employers, and they are an equal part of what we call employment. And we need to be ready as a country, and we appreciate what you're doing for the next generation of the workforce and for the most successful program
Thank you, Mr. Norcross.
in the history of the United States. And I yield back
Mr.
my
Norcross.
time to Madam Chairwoman.
You're way over time.
Well, apparently a lot of people were. I don't want you to pick on me. Just treat me fair.
Ms. Miller, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Acting Secretary Sue, do you think the Department of Labor has the power to impose a vaccine mandate on 84 million American workers?
Thank you for that question, Congresswoman. Certainly when this administration began in January 2021, we were still battling the COVID pandemic. And I think you're talking about a proposed rule that the Department of Labor did. This was work to try to make sure that workplaces were safe and
Yes,
healthy.
it was that rule that you were an architect of and that you signed off on. I want to know if you believe the Department of Labor has the power, and if you believe it was constitutional at the time to enforce this unprecedented, unheard of action on American workers.
I appreciate that, Congresswoman. I mean, as I've said here today, I believe in full fidelity to the law as passed by Congress, but also as interpreted by the courts. And the courts did strike down that rule, and as a result, we have not
So you
pursued it. We
think
have not.
Biden was wrong and the Department of Labor was wrong in imposing this emergency use vaccine mandate on 84 million workers?
I mean, I think that during the height of the pandemic, everyone, especially those of us in government, were trying to figure out the best we could do to keep workers safe in a situation in which there wasn't perfect information.
This was unprecedented in history, and we want to know today, do you believe that the Department of Labor has the power to impose a vaccine mandate on workers?
I again reiterate my full fidelity to the law and to what the courts have said about that mandate. And
thankfully the Supreme Court stepped in to stop you. But I want to know what was your plan if millions of workers were forced to be vaccinated and turn in their medical records if they refused? What was your plan for all these millions of workers that were going to quit?
I mean, I think, Congresswoman, one thing, just looking back to that period, I think this administration is proud of the recovery that we've made since 2021 by a whole host of measures.
Well,
but
we're concerned about where you are on this issue because, you want to be acting secretary here, and we want to know what you think is within your power, the Department of Labor's power to impose on American workers, because this was unprecedented. You were an architect, you signed off on it, and this was damaging to American workers.
I think, Congressman, what my record demonstrates is that I am really focused on making sure the Department of Labor fulfills its mission, including all of the things we've talked about today, to get workers into jobs in which they have the skills for them.
It would have caused millions of workers to be fired from their jobs. And I just want to say, if Senator Manchin votes to confirm Acting Secretary Sue, he is voting in support of the Biden COVID vaccine mandate. Acting Secretary Sue was one of the architects of the vaccine mandate, which the Supreme Court ruled was illegal and unconstitutional. Acting Secretary Sue tried to force 84 million Americans out of work with an illegal and unconstitutional vaccine mandate. She cannot be the Secretary of Labor. She believes the federal government in Washington, D.C. should have massive power over the lives of the American people, and it took the Supreme Court to stop her. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
She yields to me. The Acting Secretary Sue, we've heard that the most successful job creation program in the country is the Registered Apprenticeship Program. But isn't it true that only 43% of people graduate from the Registered Apprenticeship Programs? Yes or no?
I don't know. I don't
You
know that data point.
Well, it's
I don't know that data.
43%. I would never grade anything with 43% graduation rate as successful. Secretary, during your hearing for the Senate Help Committee, you confirmed the department is not currently working on changes to the joint employer standard. Will you commit to us today that DOL will not pursue such changes during your tenure, leading the agency in either your current acting capacity or if you're confirmed as secretary? Yes or no?
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox. We don't have anything about a joint employer rule on the regulatory agenda. As you know, the department is required to post.
I'm going to take that as a yes, you will not pursue such changes, and I yield back. Ms. Jayapal, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Acting Secretary Sue, it is an absolute delight to see you here as the nominee for Labor Secretary as well, and I say that also as an Asian American woman, looking at somebody who is so skilled, so experienced, so qualified, such a record of success in your tenure, and a deep lived experience of people who do the work every day that this country desperately needs, making sure that you are standing up for all the things that America is great because of our commitment to our workers. I also want to particularly thank you for your leadership on apprenticeships and making sure that workers have the skills that they need to fill the jobs created with the $2 trillion in infrastructure investment that we were able to pass in the 117th Congress. And to just give the statistics, since January of 2021, when you came in, 584,000 new apprenticeships created. In 2023 so far, 90,698 new apprenticeships created. We know that under this president, under Democratic control of the House and Senate in the 117th, there were 13 million new jobs created since the president took office. And the share of working Americans, working age Americans in the workforce is at its highest level in 16 years. So congratulations on a tremendous record of accomplishment already. As the representative of Seattle, which boasts a thriving business community and a very strong economy, I know firsthand the value of engaging with employers to promote broad-based economic prosperity. Acting Secretary Sue, would you agree that businesses and employers are key stakeholders in the effort to build an economy that works for everyone?
I absolutely agree with that, Congresswoman, and I think my record demonstrates that. Yes.
And in fact, you have some history with your own family's experience running a franchise business. I wonder if you wanted to share that.
Yes, thank you very much, Congresswoman. So for me, the idea that small businesses are the engines of our economy and that they are, job creators and are important for us to support is not an abstract thing. It's something that I know from my life. My parents owned a laundromat and dry cleaning business, and I have memories of being a small child sitting on the dryer while my parents worked. And then when I was in high school, they owned a pizza franchise, a Shakey's Pizza. And I remember, because my sister and I we got the pizzas that customers had rejected that my dad would bring home at the end of the day, and that was often what we brought in our lunch boxes the next day. But what it means is that, around our kitchen table, I learned about what small businesses have to do. I learned about, the struggles to hire and train, to maintain a payroll. My dad worked alongside workers. He, worked the ovens, but when he was needed to take orders, he did that. When he was needed to wipe down tables, he did that. And so I have great respect for the hard work, the investments, the risks, the challenges, and also the joy of what small business owners do, because it is the reason I was able to go to college is that my parents had a small business. And in my time as deputy secretary, but also in my time as acting secretary, and if confirmed as secretary, I understand personally the importance of our role in supporting those small businesses.
Thank you. And my colleagues across the aisle are trying to portray you as somebody who doesn't care about business or employers. But isn't it true that a number of business associations have endorsed your nomination to be labor secretary, including the Society for Human Resource Management, the LA Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, AAPI Business Leaders, and Small Business Majority?
Yes, Congresswoman, thank you so much for that. I do think that for businesses and business associations, industry associations who have worked with me, I have earned their respect, and I'm grateful for it.
Your collaborative approach is also evident in your experience facilitating several high-profile contract negotiations. I find it remarkable, for example, that you've been endorsed by both the International Longshore and Warehouse Union and the Port of Los Angeles. How would you respond to critics who claim that you are not capable of being a neutral arbiter?
Thank you very much for that question, Congresswoman. My record demonstrates that would be false. I mean, right now, right, there are a number of high-stakes negotiations that are going on, and I have the experience and the track record to demonstrate that having somebody in the role of labor secretary to help make sure that parties stay at the table, who understand the complexities of such negotiations, and who understand how important it is for parties to stay at the table is something that I bring to the job.
All my colleagues need to do is look at the facts, and they will see that you are absolutely the best candidate to be our next Secretary of Labor, and I look forward to that day. Thank you so much for your dedication and your commitment to this country and to this work. Thank you, Acting Secretary.
Ms. Jayapal. Ms. Steele, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox, for hosting this important hearing. Ms. Sue, West Coast ports are the gateway to trade and our supply chains, as you know. The labor negotiations for the West Coast ports have gone on now for almost a year, and an agreement has still not been reached. Recently, West Coast ports and terminals were shut down after union employees walked off the job. Disruptions in the supply chain will damage our economy, and it's been done so because I saw a lot of ships during the COVID times that, it's lined up on the shore of my district at that time. Former Secretary of Labor Walsh acknowledged this when he successfully intervened in a rail strike that threatened the entire country. So question is, what's the Bureau of Labor Statistics telling you about the potential damage the West Coast port shutdown might have on economy and the labor market?
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. I was very proud to work alongside then Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh on that rail negotiation where we brought the parties in for 20 hours in our office and reached a tentative agreement. These negotiations can be complicated and they can be prolonged and there will be ups and downs. When it comes to the port, we're talking about 29 ports on the West Coast involving about 22,000 workers, ILWU members, and the parties have been in conversation. Since I got involved a couple of months ago, they did reach a tentative about some of their complicated issues, but they're not finished yet. They are still bargaining, they're still at the table. What you noted about the ships that were lined up, that was true, we all saw that, right? That is not the case today. That is no longer happening. And I think that part of that is a reflection of, workers showing up every day, doing the hard work, the same work they did throughout the pandemic to keep our cargo moving and keep our economy running. And it's a tribute to the employers who are also working very hard to make sure that that critical lifeline, as you say, to trade, to goods, stays operational. That has been true in the last few months since I have been here, sitting in my seat as acting secretary, and I am committed to supporting the parties as they work through the issues that are on the table, and I understand that they are continuing to do that.
Thank you. It seems like that negotiation will be done, hopefully, that soon. But my question was, West Coast ports shutdown might have an economy and the labor market. What's the potential damages was my question here.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Yes, I'll have to get back to you on the exact figures about that, but in general, you are correct that the West Coast ports play a really critical role. I believe at one point it was like 40% of all cargo moves through some of the West Coast ports, but I can certainly see if we have more data. I think your general point that a resolution is important because so much of our economy relies on what happens in the West Coast ports is well taken.
So it's under negotiations right now, and it's very much hurting our economy. So what are you doing to prevent strike and further work stoppages? Because it seems like they just completely shut down after union employees walked off the jobs. I mean, that's not really acceptable here. So what you are doing to prevent in the future?
So, Congresswoman, the parties are definitely at the table. They are working through some difficult issues. There are lots of things for them to be talking about.
I hear that there are negotiations, but how about the shutdown?
Well, I'm not aware of a shutdown. There's what's really going on, and there's been some media reports that are not actually accurate. There is not a shutdown. Cargo continues to move in the ports. There has been maybe like a decade-long trend of some decrease in cargo coming through the West Coast. That is not as a result of the talks that are going on. But I think I agree with your general point that coming to a resolution and providing some certainty and clarity is good for everybody.
So then, you know what, let's go back to that. What kind of deal how are you going to resolve this dispute? What kind of negotiations going on? You said there are really a lot of complications and there are a lot of things on the table right now. How are we going to do it? And it's been, almost a year, and that negotiation was done. And that really hurts economy that I've been talking about. So what's on the table and how are you going to solve it? How soon?
Thank you, Congresswoman. So I do want to restate that cargo continues to move at the West Coast ports, and workers continue to show up and do their jobs, even during negotiations. And the parties, the leadership of both parties is very hard at work trying to resolve the issues that they have. This idea...
I think if you would mind just submitting in writing to the Congresswoman the rest of your answer.
I could just close it really quickly, which is that this idea that these negotiations are complicated is not unique to this particular issue, but we see time and time again that the collective bargaining process does work, and unions and employers reach agreements about things that help to assure that the work that they do continues.
Over. Ms. Manning, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Acting Secretary, I'd like to apologize for the insulting way that you were welcomed to this hearing. The opening comments were appalling, unnecessary, and mean-spirited. And they were an attempt to cover up the extraordinarily great work the 117th Congress and the Biden administration did to bring our country through the worst global pandemic in a century. Thanks to the American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act, we have the most robust economic recovery of any country in the world. We have the lowest unemployment rate in decades, and we have seen wage increases for workers who have not participated in the economic growth that benefited large corporations and the wealthy during the prior administration. So I want to thank you for your service to our country and the American people you work to help every day. And as you and I have discussed previously, I represent North Carolina's 6th Congressional District, where we are enjoying the growth of advanced manufacturing, particularly in the clean energy, automotive, and aerospace industries. We welcome this growth, but I hear from employers in my district that they are struggling to find skilled workers to fill these good-paying jobs. So can you tell us more about the Department of Labor's work to expand training opportunities to help workers gain the skills they need, and also how Congress can help with these efforts?
Thank you so much for that question, Congresswoman. We are really laser focused on this exact issue of meeting the need for skilled workers in specific jobs and industries that are growing as a result of the important work of this body in partnership with the President to make historic investments. What we're also seeing, and this is a tribute to good policy and how important it is when the federal government engages in policy that helps to expand the economy and build jobs, the private sector also contributes. And so we're seeing hundreds of billions of dollars now being invested in these exact same industries, especially in advanced manufacturing, in ways that I think are going to have a historic impact on the economy going forward, building a strong, resilient, and equitable economy. So our role as the Department of Labor is to help make sure that training programs are actually meeting employer needs and recruiting from workers who, and it's important to say, because I think it has been suggested otherwise, that workers have come back into the labor market to pre-pandemic levels, especially in the prime age workforce of like 25 to 54. So we are seeing, again, historic economic growth. But what we need to do is finish that job. We need to make sure that those impacts are felt in every single community, that every worker who wants a good job can find the educational and training opportunities to get them, and that employers, who I've also talked to many who say they need skilled workers, it is our job to help support them, not to do it for them, right? The whole idea is that communities working together have solved lots of problems before, but our job is to help to support that and to bring all of the players in the workforce system in line to help do this. So one of the things that I have not yet talked about, I've talked about a lot of things that we're doing, but one is it's an $80 million grant that is specific to these particular sectors: infrastructure, advanced manufacturing, clean energy, to help build proven models for training, and also to help scale them, right? It's not enough now, because of the historic growth that we're seeing, because the jobs are being created, because of the point that's been made that there are lots of jobs out there right now that need workers. We need to be able to scale and to be able to move quickly to finish the job, and that's something that I look forward to doing and continuing to do with you and with this body.
Thank you so much. My district is also home to extraordinary universities and colleges, such as North Carolina A&T, which recently got a $23.7 million grant to build a training program for workers, and Guilford Technical Community College, which just received a $1.7 million federal grant to expand its truck driver training programs. Should we be working more with our colleges and community colleges to help create workforce development programs?
I see that my time is about to expire. 100% yes.
Thank you so much for your testimony today, and thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you. Mr. Bean, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon, committee. I'd like to yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Bean. So we've heard some comments from the other side, as well as from the witness herself, to the effect of what does California's AB 5 have to do with any of this? But President Biden has himself said, and this is a quote, that he wants a federal standard modeled on California's ABC test for all labor, employment, and tax laws. So, Ms. Sue, you're the acting Secretary of Labor. You're President Biden's chosen nominee to be Secretary of Labor. I think it's fair to ask, do you agree or disagree with the President that AB 5 is a good model for the nation?
Congressman, thank you. Let me be as clear as I can be about this. AB 5 is not federal law. It would only be federal law if Congress decides that it should be. I have not called for that on the federal level. In fact, I have explicitly, during my tenure as Deputy Secretary of Labor, when we created the proposed rule about independent contractor, explicitly said that we do not adopt an ABC test, and in fact, we cannot adopt
Sure,
an ABC test.
and I understand that. However, there's quite a bit of leeway in that rule, and it says that and it's clearly designed to mimic the ABC test in many respects. So the disposition of the enforcer is centrally important to our oversight role as Congress. So I didn't get an answer. I'd like just an answer, yes or no, agree, disagree, with the president's statement that the ABC test of California's AB5 is a good model for the nation. Yes or no?
I mean, I have to say again, because the question seems to ignore that we can't, it is strictly in the purview of Congress to decide whether AB5, the ABC test, right, would become the test for independent contractor versus
Sure.
employee status on the federal level.
Earlier you were saying, you said that you might have expressed support for AB5 before. Just to refresh your recollection, shortly after it was signed, you went on the record with Cal Matters and said not only were you going to be adjudicating claims that came to you, but you said we will be doing investigations and audits so that those who want to comply with the need to reclassify can do so, and those who don't will understand, these are your words, that's not the kind of economy we want in California. You celebrated its passage. Now, will you at least recognize, Acting Secretary Sue, that people in California have lost their careers, their livelihoods, their ability to work because of AB5?
So, Congressman, I want to also say that I have heard from people who have said that, and I think that it's important to acknowledge them. I've had direct conversations with them as recently as, a few weeks ago, where I don't want ever our policies to result in people losing their livelihoods or having to.
So did AB5 do that? Did it cause people to lose their livelihoods?
Well, I'm saying that I've heard people who said that. I've heard people who said something different too. I think the important.
You've heard people say that they lost their livelihoods because of AB5.
I have had people tell me that.
And so do you not believe them? Or could you say they said it?
I guess, Congressman, even to the quote that you just read, it feels like that quote is exactly what, in my role as the enforcer of laws, I would say, which is that we are going to enforce the law as it is written, and we want to make sure that we have an economy in which people, everybody plays by the rules.
So this is a book of stories shortly after the law passed from people who said, as you would put it, that they lost their livelihoods because of AB5. Couple examples. Jody said, I worked years to gain my skills as an American Sign Language interpreter. It was my goal since I was 9 years old. After AB5, I lost all 3 of my agencies. The dream I worked for is lost. I can't provide my family, and thousands of California deaf won't be serviced. Is your message to Jody that that's just not the kind of economy that we want in California?
My message to her would be that bona fide independent contractors will always have a place in our economy. They play an important role.
But not her. She's not a bona fide independent contractor.
I haven't had a conversation with her, but I do think that it's very important to reiterate that the policies at the United States are the policies that, at the federal level, are the policies that would be within the purview of the Labor Department.
While you were California Labor Secretary, did you meet with any of the folks who lost their livelihoods from AB5?
I did. I heard from many people on all sides about the impact, the impact of AB5
You did? Okay.
after it was passed. And as I said earlier, I spent a lot of time talking to employers about how implementation could support them, right? Sometimes
That's
people
good.
had an idea about what it would do.
And as you know,
It wasn't true.
California voters have also weighed in with Prop 22, which said we don't want AB5 to apply to app-based drivers. How did you vote on that on Prop 22?
How did I vote on Prop 22? I don't remember how I voted on that.
You don't remember? On
I
Prop
don't-
22, the one applying
Remind-
to Uber, Lyft, DoorDash drivers, saying that AB5 isn't going to apply to them, you don't remember how you voted?
Right. I think.
Well,
so,
I'll give you a second
Congressman-
to think about it. Do you remember how you voted on Prop 22?
Congressman, I want to say very clearly here that I pledge, and I think my record demonstrates, absolute fidelity to the laws as passed by this body, as interpreted by the courts, and as delegated to
I
the
appreciate
Department
that,
of Labor
but
to
now you've had a second to
enforce.
think. Do you remember how you voted on Prop 22?
Mr. Kiley and Mr. Bean, your time is up. Mr. Bowman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Acting Secretary Sue, for joining us here today. It's clear from your long, outstanding record, your work as Deputy Secretary and now Acting Secretary, and testimony and answers here today that you are extremely committed to our country, our workers, and our economy. And thank you so much for your love of our country and for your service to this country. My background is in education. I spent 2 decades working in schools in the Bronx before coming to Congress. So I really believe that effective partnerships between schools, both secondary and higher education, local businesses, local workforce development agencies are key to creating successful pathways to good paying jobs. I've seen how important these partnerships can be up close. And I just want to follow up on Ms. Manning's, Representative Manning's previous question. Can you please discuss the steps the department is taking to encourage that collaboration, especially to support pathways into sectors like STEM, the STEM workforce, that are becoming increasingly critical to our economy? Can you talk about that?
Yes, thank you so much for that question, Congressman. So in many of the workforce development programs that we are supporting and for which we're providing technical assistance, community colleges and educational institutions in general play a very, very important role. We have an opportunity now for millions of people throughout the United States who don't have college degrees to actually get good paying jobs in advanced manufacturing, in clean energy, in infrastructure, in a whole host of industries that are going to allow them to build their way to the middle class. And so having multiple pathways to that is very, very important. Working at the high school level so that young people can think about what opportunities are going to be available for them. Not saying there's only one path, right, to success. Right. Community colleges play such an important role, and that's a space in which the Department of Labor has done more work because of the role that community colleges play in workforce systems. So in providing, for example, pre-apprenticeship programs, right? For a young person to go to a community college and gain the skills to learn math that will help them get a job in construction is really key for them to then connect to the apprenticeship program in construction that then puts them into a job, a really good paying, secure job. We have a community college grant program that I think is now in its third round, in which we have invested $135 million in community colleges to this end. And so I think the partnerships, our job is to align the various parts of the system so that they work as seamlessly as possible for employers and for job seekers and for workers in the system who are seeking to upskill, right? So all of these are really important. I've also, since I've been in this position, spoken to Secretary Cardona about collaboration between our agencies to make sure that this happens.
Thank you so much for that answer. And you mentioned interagency collaboration, and that's obviously very important to the work that you do and we should all be doing here on the Capitol. How are your agencies working together on workforce development? Can you dive a little bit deeper into that?
So I have one very concrete example to share on that, which is teacher apprenticeships. Recognizing that teachers worked throughout the pandemic, right, got us through. I have 2 children who relied on their teachers in times where they had to adjust and find new ways of teaching, and we're doing hybrid teaching. So we have now in this country a need to build the teaching workforce, and it is our turn to reinvest in that workforce that has given always, but that gave us so much. So we've worked with the Department of Education to expand teacher apprenticeships. In January 2021, there were 2 states that had them. Now there are 17 states, and we are not finished with that work. So that's one concrete way. But another is to, what we just talked about is really looking at how to better align, how to move systems, right? How to get the local workforce boards, how to get state workforce systems. And the Department of Labor spends a lot of time. We just had a conference where over 400 workforce leaders came to hear about our vision for how we meet the workforce needs of the jobs that are being created. But Secretary Cardona is very committed to making sure that the educational system fulfills their role in it. So we are talking about all kinds of other collaborations that would help to make this system work for the things that we've been talking about here today.
Thank you so much, and I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman. Ms. Houchin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, Ms. Sue, for testifying before us today. As our committee begins consideration of WIOA reauthorization this Congress, I'm grateful that we're able to process some of the progress that has been made or lack thereof over the past few years. As you know, 40% of able-bodied adults are not engaged in the workforce. Every time I'm in the district, I hear more and more from employers that they're looking for workers, they're looking for employees. You, more than anyone else, have had a front row seat in the failures of the administration to reach our full workforce potential. So I'm going to need you to answer for some of those problems for me and my constituents back home. So there are accountability provisions under the WIOA Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act that have not been implemented as Congress intended. Under the department's regulations, the state can miss its agreed upon performance by 50% and still be considered a success. To put this in context with the state of California's agreed upon level of performance, if just 39% of WIOA participants are employed in the second quarter after exiting the program, DOL would consider that a performance success. What grade would 39% be in school?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman, for that question. I do believe that we have to support training programs, but also hold them accountable, right? Make sure that, for example, they are actually providing training for in-demand
Ms. Sue,
jobs.
what grade is 39%?
I mean, I'm sure
the letter grade for 39% would be an F. Aren't we setting the bar too low when we say that 39% performance is considered a success? Yes or no? Is that setting the bar too low?
I mean, Congresswoman, I'm not familiar with the exact metric that you're talking about, or how it's set. I don't. For example, if you're telling me that we are not in our implementation of WIOA complying with what Congress says, that's something that I would take very seriously.
Okay.
I've pledged full fidelity to the law. I think that's very important.
In October 2022, the WHD published a notice of proposed rulemaking rescinding and replacing Trump's independent contractor rule. We've heard some about that today. In its place, DOL proposed a 6-factor economic realities test to determine whether a worker is, quote, economically dependent on a company under a totality of the circumstances. In essence, saying that if they are economically dependent, they have to be employees and not under a 1099. Shouldn't the American people have the freedom and the opportunity to decide what work environment is best for them?
Thank you very much for that question, Congresswoman. So the proposed rule by the Department of Labor does adopt a multi-factor test. It's not
Ms.
just
Sue,
one factor.
I don't have much time. I understand it's a multi-factor test, but let me give you a real-life example. So I was a stay-at-home mom for 5 years, and during that time, I was an independent contractor under a 1099. And I was only operating under a 1099 model with one entity. So under these definitions, I would have been qualified as economically dependent, and under the rule proposed by DOL, unable to participate in the workforce under that model. That doesn't seem very American to me under our terms of freedom to decide for ourselves what is best for us and our families. And in fact, that if the DOL rule had been in place when I was a stay-at-home mom, I would have chosen not to engage in the workforce as an employee. Will you commit to protecting the independent contractor rule for people like me?
Congresswoman, I certainly want to restate that bona fide independent contractors will always have a place in our economy, should have a place in the economy, and play a very, very important role.
Will you turn away from the proposed rule?
Well, our proposed rule is consistent. It's not 6 factors that we invented. It's factors that are based on decades of federal.
Do you support the Trump administration era rule?
We rescinded that rule as being inconsistent with
I would encourage you to continue to turn away from efforts to undermine the independent contractor opportunities for American citizens. One other thing I want to ask you with the limited time I have now is, you have said repeatedly, as passed by this body, you want to do only what this body intends you to do, but we haven't ever passed a bill yet taking away opportunities for independent contractors, yet your agency is implementing such a provision by rule. Is that correct?
Our rule is not intended to take away livelihoods at all,
But did Congress pass a bill on that?
Well, so
no, they did not.
Well, it's our job to enforce the Fair Labor Standards Act, and the rule that we have proposed is consistent with decades of federal case law interpreting when
Yet it
somebody
was overturned, correct?
Well, our rule, it's a notice, it's not a final rule yet, so it hasn't been challenged, it has not been overturned, but it is a rule that, in the stage that, when we
Ms.
noticed
Sue,
it, it was consistent with federal case law.
I would ask that you answer Congresswoman Houchin's question in writing. Thank you very much, Ms. Wild.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I would like to introduce some letters of support from businesses that were referred to by my colleague, Representative Jayapal.
Without objection.
Thank you. Secretary Sue, I'd like to apologize for the tone and tenor of this hearing. I worry that we lose many great candidates for public office who simply see this kind of thing on television and are not willing to put their name up for this kind of a questioning. I truly believe that Americans want to see more civility and decency from their elected officials, but unfortunately I don't think we've seen a whole lot of that here today. But I do want to step back a moment and talk a little bit about this joint employer or independent contractor rule. There's been a lot of questioning without a lot of opportunity for you to complete an answer. Am I correct, first of all, that much of the case law that you referred to arose from the fact that the independent contractor classification was often being abused by employers, either to avoid payroll taxes, benefits, or other things?
Yes, thank you so much for that question, Congresswoman. So thank you also for reminding us that the reason there is a rule is that misclassification, now this is not about ending bona fide independent contracting, it is about making sure that everybody plays by the same set of rules, and that when someone should be an employee and therefore enjoy a century's worth of labor law protections, basic minimum wage, overtime, unemployment insurance, safety net, workers' compensation, that they do get that. So that's a long way of saying, yes, that there has been litigation about this, and that has created a body of case law about what the right test should be.
And in fact, when there's abuse of the independent contractor classification, it's actually to the detriment of American workers, employees, or people who should be treated as employees, entitled to the benefits of that classification, correct?
That is absolutely correct, Congresswoman.
Okay. So there was reference made to the fact that your family owned a franchise business, a pizza franchise, when you were growing up. So I assume from that you have respect for the franchise model as a way for people to get started in business?
Yes, again, this is not an abstract issue for me, but it is also a way, and I've heard directly from franchisors about this, that it is a way that individuals, immigrant communities get a toehold into the middle class, and that is the story of my family.
Okay, thank you. So with regard to joint employer-related issues, there seems to be some confusion, at least among the questioners today, about who created that rule that is being objected to. And am I correct that it was a proposed rule put forth by the NLRB?
Oh, yes, there is another entire separate set of laws and rules that fall under the National Labor Relations Board.
And the NLRB is a separate and independent agency from Department of Labor, is that correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So this joint employer rule is not something that is on the Department of Labor's regulatory agenda.
That is correct.
And as such, would not be something that falls under your jurisdiction as Secretary of Labor, is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. And is it true that the only reason that the Department of Labor had to take action to rescind the rule was because a higher court instructed it to do so?
Yes, thank you very much, Congresswoman. So there's two different things, right? One conversation we were having about the independent contractor rule, we've noticed a rule on that. The other thing that you're talking about is there was a joint employer rule of the prior administration that we had to rescind.
Administration, you mean the Trump administration?
Correct.
Created a rule that a federal court determined was not a valid rule. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And instructed the Department of Labor to rescind that.
I don't remember if there was a specific instruction, but we would not keep a rule in place that was not in compliance with federal law.
Thank you very much. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Weil. You win the gold prize for today. Mr. Burleson, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for coming. Earlier, you said that you had no hand in the writing of the AB5 rule in California, correct?
Correct, Congressman.
No input, no advice.
So I don't remember specifically about that particular rule, but I will say that in my role in state government, in the executive branch, as an appointee of the governor in California, we would sometimes be asked for technical assistance on implementation. How would this be implemented? Could this be implemented? It's the same thing that I've seen here at the federal level.
Yeah, and then you said also, and I'll just say this, like I found it remarkable to hear that and to hear this as well, because where I come from, the state of Missouri, our directors, our department heads, every agency head is actively involved in any legislative process that their department is going to have to deal with. And so to not provide counsel, to not provide input would be negligent for that department head.
Right. So I think, Congressman, if you're referring to technical assistance, right? How would you implement this? I think the question that was asked was whether I helped to write the law, and I do fully
and so you
appreciate
did have technical assistance in writing the law.
I mean, we generally were asked for technical assistance about
Okay.
laws that we would be charged with enforcing.
Let's jump to this question. You said that you would not endorse or want to support taking that law nationwide. Is that correct? Would you support the rules of AB5 or something similar go from a California law to nationwide law?
I certainly have not done that, Congressman.
And you won't do that?
Well, and when given, when putting together a rule about independent contractor versus employee status, the Department of Labor, under my leadership and that of former Secretary Marty Walsh, we were explicit, because we're governed by what the law allows, that we could not do that.
Okay, I'm going to move on, because I think people in my state want to know as well. We have a very well-functioning system for workers' compensation on the state level. There is credible fear that there will be rules changed from your department that might impact states and their ability to handle workers' compensation insurance, or to possibly nationalize it. Can you say today that you will not make rule changes to workers' compensation or try to nationalize it?
Thank you very much for that question, Congressman, and for the opportunity to talk a little about. We have, under the Department of Labor, an Office of Workers' Compensation Programs, but it administers federal workers' compensation programs. We do collaborate with the states at various times. One of the things that I said when I came in was, instead of having individuals who both would be covered by a state workers' compensation and federal workers' compensation, try to navigate those systems, we should do our best to work with state systems to make the provision of...
It's my hope that you leave the states alone and let them do what they do better. Let me say this. I'm really glad to hear that that AB5 is not going to go nationwide, and the reason is that it was clearly disastrous for the state of California, and I say that as someone in the state of Missouri. We received a lot of employees and workers as a result of that disastrous law, and I want to point one out to you. This is an individual. Her name is Theldarine D. Sova. She owns and operates a trucking company, did in California, had managed her own time, all of her own benefits, everything was her decision, and she, apparently, according to that rule, was not smart enough to know what's good for her, but at the end of the day, she had a choice: give up her company or go work for somebody else, right, as a W-2 employee. She chose to leave California and move to God's country, Missouri. And I'm glad to have her as a citizen, but it's gentleman from California is lost. And with that, I'll turn the remainder of my time over to him.
With just the few seconds we have here, Acting Secretary Sue, I wanted to give you a chance to revisit your testimony from our last exchange about Prop 22, which was passed by almost 60% of California voters, to say that we want Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, DoorDash, app-based drivers to be able to be independent workers. Now, you were Secretary of Labor at the time this passed in 2020, and your testimony was that you do not remember how you voted. Do you want to make any correction to that testimony?
I mean, Congressman, as you've noted, there are a lot of important issues in California. I am no longer in the government there, but certainly as the Acting Secretary of Labor, it is my job to work with all states, and I would be very
So you stand by your statement that you do not remember how you voted on that proposition?
I mean, what I'm saying is I'm very eager to work with you on addressing the many issues that you have raised.
And I'm glad about that, but I didn't ask you that. Do you remember?
In California, as well as across the country.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Burleson. Ms. Hayes, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Acting Secretary Sue, for your testimony before this committee today. I hear from constituents in every sector of the economy about impending workforce shortages. We need more teachers, farm workers, nurses, and engineers. I also want to thank you for your comments earlier about working with the Department of Education on teacher apprenticeships and the teaching workforce. There is a dire need in that area. In the 117th Congress, Democrats invested heavily in infrastructure, energy, and manufacturing to address supply chain issues. But we still need to train workers to perform critical jobs in these sectors. There's a great need for a skilled workforce. In Connecticut, more than 100,000 skilled jobs remain unfilled. Resources like the American Job Centers, which deliver free employment and training services through one-on-one career counseling, job training, and employment placements, are building the pipeline of workers. The 19 Connecticut American Job Centers, including 4 located in my district, serve 90,000 people across the state and work with 3,000 employers to train workers, post jobs, and hire every year. However, there is more work to be done to close the workforce gap. It is estimated that the U.S. spends about $500 million a year on individual training accounts, serving about 220,000 adults and dislocated workers nationwide. Partnering with employers is a key strategy to ensure that workforce training initiatives and American Job Centers match the needs of the region. Acting Secretary Sue, how can Congress scale up our investments in WIOA training programs such as career counseling, American Job Centers, and other employer programs? And additionally, what has the department done to foster more cooperation between employers and training programs?
Thank you so much for that question, Congresswoman. As you know, WIOA is a very important federal investment in creating a high-functioning, reliable workforce development system that trains people in their communities for the jobs that are there. And because of the investments of this body and this administration, working in conjunction with the Biden-Harris administration, jobs that are actually coming. And we take that obligation very seriously, to work with the states, to work with cities. You know, some of the most effective training programs are local. They're developed by employers and their partners. They could be unions, they could be community-based organizations, they could be training centers, they could be educational institutions, so that people can get jobs in the communities. They don't have to leave their communities in order to find good work that gives them a pathway to the middle class. And so we have made investments specifically in industries where we see challenges recruiting and training a skilled workforce, and also in industries that are growing as a result of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, Inflation Reduction Act, and those kinds of investments.
Thank you. I'm also very pleased to see that the department's budget includes robust funding for strengthening community college programs that build capacity in the workforce. People often overlook community colleges as part of workforce development. In my district, Naugatuck Valley Community College, where I'm a graduate of, partners with Northwest Regional Workforce Investment Board in the greater Waterbury area to train qualified adults and dislocated local workers in various programs, including manufacturing, childcare, paralegal services, horticulture. Can you talk about how the department and Congress can partner to boost and strengthen community college programs as part of the workforce development pipeline?
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman. So community colleges play an incredibly important role. They are partners in training partnerships, right? They are one of the partners that helps to provide, whether it's a pre-apprenticeship program that helps to prepare someone for the workforce, for an apprenticeship program in their community, whether it's somebody who's been in the workforce but wants to upskill and change jobs, change industries, improve their salary or wages. Coming through the community college is one way to do that, and that's why we do have the Strengthening Community Colleges grants, where we have put out about $135 million into various community colleges to allow them to play that role in ensuring that their programs are tied to in-demand jobs in the communities where their students are from.
Well, thank you for that. I so appreciate that, because we all know that the pathway to success looks very different for everyone. For some people, it's higher education. For others, it's workforce development. But all of those are equally important. So thank you for your commitment to those things, and also connecting people to work and doing that safely. I appreciate your testimony today. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Hayes. Mr. Kiley, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're almost done. Acting Secretary Sue, do you accept any responsibility for the $32 billion in unemployment fraud that occurred on your watch in California?
Thank you very much for that, Congressman. I certainly know that I and many of my colleagues and others who sat in the same position that I did when the pandemic hit wish that we had had a system that was capable of meeting the need. That is why, in the time that I've been deputy secretary, I've been really focused on helping to support states.
Okay, but I'm sorry, I just got to stop you, because let's focus on the question that was asked, okay? Do you accept any responsibility for the unemployment fraud that occurred in California, yes or no?
I think that an unemployment insurance system that truly delivers in times of crisis should be the goal of everybody. And California's system, like all the systems across the country.
Do you accept any responsibility for the unemployment fraud that occurred in California?
So let me answer this this way, Congressman, just so we're clear about exactly what happened. So over 95% of the fraud that occurred in California, but this is consistent with the rest of the country, occurred in a program called Pandemic Unemployment
I
Assistance.
understand all that, and I will stipulate that there were things that were beyond your control. What I'm asking you is, do you accept any responsibility for the unemployment fraud that occurred in California?
So let me just say what the state auditor said, right? The state auditor said that the reason for the fraud that occurred in that program was two things. One is the completely unprecedented spike in claims, and the second was that the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, in its design, did not have the same safeguards that unemployment insurance has, right? It was designed for a group of individuals who were not eligible for unemployment insurance.
Okay, so you're quoting the state audit report. I happen to have right here the state audit report. Despite repeated warnings, EDD did not bolster its fraud detection efforts until months into the pandemic. Now, you in your testimony in the Senate, you said that as soon as we knew that there was fraud happening, I shut the front door to that fraud. That's what you said. That was your testimony. As soon as we knew that there was fraud happening, I shut the front door to that fraud. You said I made changes to the program that would ensure people wouldn't get in the front door, and yet the very independent audit report that you just cited says exactly the opposite. So how do you reconcile those two things?
Thank you, Congressman. I'm not sure. So there were two reports. What you said that, what you quoted me as saying, I was talking about one of the things that was built into the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program was automatic backdating, meaning that whenever somebody applied...
I'm aware that you made changes to automatic backdating, but I'm saying, is this audit report wrong, that despite repeated warnings, EDD did not bolster its fraud detection efforts under your leadership?
Well, so what I said that I shut the front door, it's because we stopped in California the automatic backdating that meant that somebody who applied
I understand the automatic, but I'm not asking about that.
Okay.
So we have another statement here from Cotty Petrie Norris, who is the Democrat who chaired the Assembly Accountability and Administrative Review Committee. She said that there were simple and obvious steps that are implemented across the country that you did not implement, and she said that you in particular have not done a good job at running the Employment Development Department, and as a result, has wasted billions of dollars and, more importantly, caused heartache for millions of Californians. Was Democrat Assemblywoman Cotty Petrie Norris wrong about that?
Well, to be clear, Congressman, I did not run the EDD. I was the labor secretary in California, but several agencies fell under my purview, and I did take responsibility for our need. There were, desperate Californians who were very hard hit by by closures, by the loss of their jobs, and relied on unemployment insurance.
So you
but
do
also
take
on
some
pandemic
responsibility
unemployment
for the
assistance.
fraud.
Yes, I do.
You do.
I take
And what would you have done
responsibility for the fact
differently
that
if you
the
could do it?
system did not deliver
Sure.
in ways that we would have hoped that it delivered. But the fraud, as the auditor found, was a result of unprecedented spike in claims and the design of the program. Now, I'm not criticizing, actually. I do think that any kind of fraud, abuse, there's no place in the system for any of that. The fact that that occurred led to steps that we had to take to shut down fraud, which also caused delays in eligible individuals getting their claims. It was a perfect
Is there anything
storm.
that you might have done differently that would have prevented this fraud?
Well, that is why, in the time that I've been in this role now, I've been very focused on trying to help create a system that is going to
And I'm
work
glad to hear
in
that.
the next crisis.
But looking back on what happened in California, $32 billion, huge sum of money that we lost. We're still paying the price for that. Is there anything you would have done differently as secretary to stop that from happening?
I mean, again, the system needed to work when people needed it, right? And there were people who got the benefits that they needed. It helped them stay in their homes. It helped them keep food on the table. It helped to support the kind of economic recovery that we've seen now.
Madam Chair,
But
I'm out of time here, but I will yield back and just note that we have a nominee here who $32 billion was lost. The state auditor found that was because of the performance of her department and still can't tell us one thing she would have done differently.
Thank you, Mr. Kiley. Ms. Stevens, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Ms. Sue, it's so great to see you. And I just wanted to clarify a couple of things briefly. Under your tenure at the Department of Labor as the Deputy Secretary, I'm aware that 4,600 new registered apprenticeship programs with 11,000 new employers partnering on or adopting regional apprenticeships have occurred. You worked with the former Labor Secretary, Marty Walsh, to help President Biden accomplish the fastest jobs recovery in nearly 40 years, a record 13.1 million jobs created since President Biden took office, including 800,000 manufacturing jobs. And this is something in my home state of Michigan that we are feeling in our bones. We've got record low unemployment. And so, Madame, I would like to salute you and thank you for your leadership of a very critical agency during an unbelievable, unprecedented time in our nation's history. Now, thinking about this unemployment issue, insurance fraud issue in California, the first is that the pandemic era fraud was obviously widespread. You can compare rates across a multitude of states, from Rhode Island, Nevada, New York, Tennessee, South Carolina, Massachusetts. The second is that California is a huge state, right? I mean, we can fit multiple states within California. You're west of the Mississippi. We get how this country was created. And it processed 1 in 5 of all unemployment claims in the entire country. Is that right, Ms.
Yes.
Sue?
Thank you so much for that, Congresswoman. We did have, because it is a large state, about 1 in 5 claims in the entire country. Even having that, the fraud rate in our system was less than that of about a dozen states. So that is because of measures that we took to stop the fraud when we saw that it was happening.
And isn't it true that 95 to 98% of the fraud in California was not from the regular unemployment insurance program that you administered, but actually from the specifically created pandemic unemployment assistance program, and that subsequent audits prove this to be the case?
That is absolutely true, Congresswoman.
And isn't it true that the California State Auditor did not find that any directives or decisions that you made contributed to the fraud that attacked California's unemployment system.
That is true too, Congresswoman.
And so to be clear, Congress created that program. It was bipartisan for the new members in the room. You know, the country was dealing with an unprecedented virus. It was unanimous consent. It was put forward by a president who is currently under indictment, I believe, or soon to be. And so it was created by the CARES Act. He signed it. And Acting Secretary Sue, isn't it also true that California, when measured by timely payment of benefits to eligible individuals, actually getting benefits to people who needed them and should have received them? A study by the Century Foundation found that California was second in the nation in doing this.
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman, that's true.
Yeah, well, just to clarify for the record, because we lived through a whopper with COVID-19. And what's happened is that under President Biden, an Inflation Reduction Act, a CHIPS and Science law, an infrastructure law, people are back to work. We've spent some money. We've seen $400 billion of capital contributions coming as a result. We are training at record speed. I'm from the state with the largest number of FIRST robotic teams. I can't wait to bring you, when you get confirmed, to see these robotics teams, because as the founder of the Bipartisan Women in STEM Caucus, bipartisan, you know, leadership at the top matters. Julie Sue's leadership matters. It's going to matter a lot to my district in Oakland County that is innovating, manufacturing, and leading the way through a multitude of transformations in our automotive sector. And so I really want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank you for what you've already accomplished at the Department of Labor, and I cannot wait to see what's next. Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Moran is recognized.
Acting Secretary Sue, you just heard one of my colleagues say that leadership matters. Accountability and transparency is a large part of leadership. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And as a leader in your organization, you have to meet with your subordinates and you have to meet with those that you oversee and supervise to ask tough questions sometimes and to get direct answers. Is that true?
That is true, sir.
And when you ask direct, hard questions of those that you oversee, do you expect to get clear and precise answers in return?
Yes, sir.
And there's benefit to that. When you ask those tough questions, you need to hear the answers to that, whether or not those answers are tough to give or not. Is that true?
Yes.
Would you agree with me today that this committee has oversight responsibility over the functions that you perform?
Yes.
And that we are acting on behalf of the citizens of America to ask those tough questions sometime. Is that true?
Congressman, yes.
So I'm curious, why have you worked so hard today to avoid giving direct answers to the tough questions of this committee?
Well, thank you, Congressman. I'm certainly not trying to avoid answering questions. I do think that both when I ask questions of my staff and when you ask questions here, I expect people to give me a context so that I can understand with accuracy what the answer is. Some questions don't give...
Are you saying that Mr. Kiley's questions earlier were out of context or weren't clear to you? I've heard a number of my colleagues ask a lot of questions today, and you've artfully avoided answering most of them on this side of the aisle.
Well, Congressman, I'm sorry that it appears that way. I do think that your oversight role is important, and I think that answering questions is important, and I'm doing my very best to do that. I don't think every answer gives rise to a yes or no. Every question gives rise to a yes or no answer.
So you commit, even for the remainder of this hearing, to give good, direct answers to tough questions. Do I hear you say that?
I mean, I've been trying to do that the whole time I've been sitting here, Congressman.
Can you make that commitment?
Yes, of course. I will continue to do that.
With that commitment, I'm going to turn over the balance of my time to Mr. Kiley from California, and I expect that you're going to live up to that. Mr. Kiley?
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, now that we have that commitment, maybe I'll try again. Did you vote for Prop 22 in California? Yes or no?
Congressman, I am sitting here before you today to talk about the Department of Labor and our work at the Department of Labor. You're asking me about a vote I took in a at a time where we have secret ballot votes in this country. I'm not trying to say that I, one way or the other. I'm just saying we are here to talk about Department. I offered a little while ago to say I am happy and eager to work with you on the many issues that you raise that you're saying Californians continue to face.
Well, excuse me, Acting Secretary Sue.
Okay.
This is an oversight hearing, so I think we can judge what issues are relevant to our oversight function. And you just committed to my colleague that you'd give yes or no answers, then you refused. You clearest yes or no question that you could possibly give an answer to. So do you want to try one more time?
Wait, Congressman, I really am not trying to
Mr.
avoid
Chairman,
it.
point of order. You've asked that question.
All right,
at least
I'll move on.
10 or
Let's go
15
on to
times.
the.
I also just want to clarify, because I am a person of my word. I did not say you would always get yes or no questions. What I said explicitly about that is that not every question is a yes or no question. I'm going to give you the most accurate answers that I
Okay,
can.
I
I've been
appreciate
endeavoring
that.
to do that for as long as we've been sitting
So
here.
let's go
and I
back to
pledge
the issue of
continue
the joint
that.
employer rule. You said
Okay.
it's not on your agenda right now, right?
That is correct.
And so are you not planning on doing any changes to the joint employer rule during your tenure as Secretary of Labor?
I pledge to follow all of the rules of the Department of Labor, of this body, of oversight. We will not do a rule that we're not clear, that we haven't followed the rules to do. I said at the very beginning, we are deliberative when it comes to rulemaking. We engage stakeholders.
Okay,
We
I
make sure
didn't
that
ask about engagement with stakeholders or anything like that. What I asked was, are you planning to do any changes to the joint employer rule, yes or no?
we do not have a plan to do that. It is not on our agenda.
Can you commit to not making any changes to the joint employer rule as Secretary of Labor?
Well, this is why what I'm saying is that I commit to following all of the rules of rulemaking, everything that we're required to do. I pledge to you that we will do under my leadership, under my tenure at the Department of Labor. I can't sit here at this moment and tell you with certainty everything that's going to happen, but I will follow every
single process. You were also asked by Mr. Banks about the child labor crisis that we're seeing. And at your confirmation hearing, Senator Romney brought this up as well, a 70% increase. And he asked you, was that communicated to the White House prior to this year? Is that something you've communicated to them, that this is a major, major problem? And your answer was, I don't know the answer to that question. You said you didn't know whether that had been communicated to the White House, what a problem this child labor crisis was. Do you remember now whether you communicated that to the White House prior to this year?
Did you say prior to this year?
Correct.
I don't know that. I will say that we have, there is an interagency task force that the White House put together and put the Department of Labor in charge of. I am proud to play that role. It's a really important role. We are in conversations about how to address the scourge of exploitative child labor in this country.
Thank you. It just seems to be like something very important that you might have wanted to let the White House know about. Congresswoman Fernandez is recognized. Ledger Fernandez, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. And, you know, I really do want to emphasize this point of the manner in which President Biden, the Democratic caucus, and even going back to the CARES Act, as you pointed out, in a bipartisan manner, have worked so hard to create so many jobs. And we are so proud of it, because in New Mexico, we have some of the lowest unemployment in history, and that's the case across the country. But the other really important piece of it is not just have we created jobs, but have we stood with workers? Because it's also the quality of those jobs and whether the workers are going to be able to receive the benefits, the overtime, and those things that are key so that they can also prosper. Because there is a difference about when you stand with the wealthy or when you stand with the corporations versus are you standing with the workers? And in many ways, it sounds to me like when you're looking at the independent contractor issue, it is about who are you going to stand with, the workers or the corporations? In a situation where a worker, a single worker, is trying to make sure that their rights are protected, who has the power in that situation? Acting Secretary Sue.
Thank you very much for that question, Congresswoman. So I view my role as the Acting Secretary of Labor and the Department of Labor's role to make sure that we are enforcing the labor laws that have been written and given to us to enforce. And that means that we have to, that we investigate cases, that we try to make sure that workers feel safe reporting violations to us so that we can learn about those violations, and where we find them, we will enforce the law, including issuing citations and penalties to employers where appropriate.
Right. So in some senses, the Department of Labor is there to sort of as backstop, because individual workers who might be stiffed for their overtime, who might be placed in an independent contractor position, they need somebody to be on their side. And in that sense, the Department of Labor should be on their side. There's been a lot of questions around AB 5. So Acting Secretary Sue, yes or no, does the proposed rule try to implement California's ABC test as enacted in AB 5?
It does not, Congresswoman. It explicitly says that we cannot, we will not. That's not the law of the land.
Right, because we're seeking to have you be Secretary of the United States Department of Labor. From what I understand, though, the proposed rule was so reasonable that hardly anyone had much criticism about it, even groups that voiced concerns in the past. Acting Secretary Sue, yes or no, is it true that the Department of Labor has already stated that it does not have the authority under the FLSA to implement the ABC test absent an act of Congress?
That is true, Congresswoman, yes.
And yes or no, do you believe in separation of powers and that the Department of Labor does not pass laws and instead only implements rules that are consistent with the laws Congress passed?
Yes, Congresswoman, I have stated that here, and yes, I believe in separation of powers.
And, you know, we've heard all of this fear-mongering about what you do and how you voted around AB 5. What we are talking about here is the United States Department of Labor. But you did, you did live in California. Acting Secretary Sue, did you serve in the California state legislature?
I did not, Congresswoman.
And who actually passed AB 5 in California?
It was the California legislature.
And where were you when the state law was passed?
I was the Secretary of Labor in California.
As Secretary of Labor, what was your job and your requirement to do once the legislature passed that law?
So thank you very much, Congresswoman. So I oversaw agencies, including those that were charged with enforcing laws that were passed by the legislature. So our job, both as Labor Secretary in California and the agencies that I oversaw, was to enforce the law.
So what we should be asking you now, and which I think you have already said, is similarly to the manner in which you honored your obligation and oath to the Constitution in California to carry out the laws, are you committed to carry out the laws and honor an obligation and oath to the Constitution to carry out the United States laws regarding labor?
100% yes.
Thank you so very much for your dedication and your service. Service is really an act of love because it requires so much, and you have taken a lot and been so gracious and diplomatic in answering the questions today. I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. Mr. Good, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Acting Secretary. Acting Secretary, do you think that employees should be able to exercise their religious freedoms at work?
I do believe in religious freedoms, yes, Congressman.
And so therefore, what limits would you place on their First Amendment right to exercise their religious freedom at work? Employees.
Ooh, okay, so Congressman, you're asking me some things that are really outside my area of expertise, but I do believe in religious freedom. I think that's important.
So you would not place any limits on employees' right to exercise their religious freedom at work? Their First Amendment protected religious freedom at work?
So, Congressman, I don't know if you're asking about something specific that the Department of Labor has done.
Well, I would like to know if you would put any limits on an employee's right to practice their religious freedom at work as protected by the First Amendment.
So, thank you, Congressman. I think if you are referring to a rule of our agency under the Office of Federal Contractor Compliance Programs, what we did there was
okay, let me just pause you. Do you think that religious or faith-based organizations should be able to operate according to their sincerely held religious beliefs?
So let me answer it this way, Congressman. The department is committed to protecting religious freedom on behalf of all Americans. And no one should have to choose between earning a living and practicing their religious faith.
Good to hear that. So what limits would you place on the rights of a faith-based organization to practice their First Amendment rights in religious freedom?
So again, I think you're asking about OFCCP, and we.
Yes, since you've referenced it, the new rule that came out that weakened the Trump administration's rule on protecting the organization's rights as it applies to hiring in specific is obviously what we're referencing to, as you're aware of. So do you think that employers' First Amendment rights to free exercise applies to the ability to hire for a faith-based organization?
Right. Thank you, Congressman. So the religious exemption is still in place. What we did in rescinding a rule of the prior administration was restore OFCCP's longstanding practice, which is related to the test for religious exemption for religious
Well,
exemption.
there's already law in place that prohibits discrimination, obviously legally prohibited discrimination. However, a faith-based organization should have the right to, or does have the right to go ahead and practice their faith-based, their sincerely held religious beliefs. But what your rule has done is try to make it easier for them to be sued on the basis of hiring if the hiring would compromise their deeply held religious beliefs. So do you think that, again, employers' First Amendment right to free exercise applies to the ability to hire?
Thank you, Congressman. So the religious exemption is still in place. Our agency is charged with enforcing authorities to protect workers from discrimination, and we will faithfully apply the law on both of those, in both of those areas.
All right, DOL recently, and I would say egregiously, rescinded a rule that impacts the ability of religious organizations to participate in federal contracts unless they're willing to violate those deeply held religious beliefs that are, again, are protected. So what assurances can you give that you'll protect religious freedom, including, again, the First Amendment right of religious organizations that bid on federal contracts?
Yes, thank you. Yes, so the religious exemption is still in place. I want to be very clear about that.
Well, let's move on to something that you wrote. You wrote in an article in the Seattle Journal for Social and Justice in which you said, the very definition of a corporation is an entity that is created to permit maximum income and designed to insulate individuals who will profit from liability for the acts of that entity seems to promote and perpetuate economic injustice. So essentially you're saying that all the companies of which you have enforcement authority are instruments of economic injustice. Do you believe that?
Thank you very much, Congressman. I think that was a transcript from a speech, maybe, and without broader context, I will say that I have and will continue to, and have for many decades, worked with corporations of all sizes.
Do you believe that companies are inherently unjust?
No, I do not believe that.
Okay. So how would you characterize your view of a corporation today, then, if it's not unjust based on what you said or what you wrote?
I think that corporations play an important role. I think that corporations, to the extent, again, here to talk about what the Department of Labor does, they can be job creators, right? They can be small businesses, they can be large businesses. And
let me stop you. I want to read something that you said. You said that Latino workers view Asians generally not as friends or even strangers, but as enemies, the very source of their daily subjugation. What did you mean by that? Let me say it again. Latino workers view Asians generally not as friends or even strangers, but as enemies, the very source of their daily subjugation.
So there's a
Do you think that Latino workers view Asians as their enemies and the source of their daily subjugation?
I think, and I'm going to do my best here with that, Congressman. I think that was something from a while ago.
I'd like to know if you believe that. Do you believe that Asians generally, quote, that Latino workers view Asians or generally not as friends or even strangers, but as enemies, the very source of their daily subjugation? Do you believe that that Asians are subjugating Latino workers?
I believe what I was talking about, Congressman, is this is long before I came into government. This was when I worked at a nonprofit organization representing workers. I was describing the very real experience.
So you don't believe that?
I don't believe it as a general matter, but in the context of the experience I was talking about.
Thank you. My time has expired. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
I would encourage you to answer Mr. Good's question in writing. Thank you very much. Mr. Scott? Oh, sorry. Mr. Mervan, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Acting Secretary Sue, how are you today?
Good.
I want to thank you for coming to Northwest Indiana, to my district. That experience was where we were able to join the First Lady, Jill Biden, who came to a community college. And it was because of the investment of the administration, specifically in infrastructure and renewable energies, that students were able to participate and to be able to create a future for themselves. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk to you about how the Department of Labor and the administration is investing in the 21st century jobs. And again, thank you for joining us. And if you could share with me, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Congressman, thank you so much, and thank you for your hospitality on that trip. We were there, as you said, with the First Lady, visiting Ivy Tech Community College, which is one of the examples of how an effective workforce system combines the resources of a community to connect employers with jobs and the need for skilled workers, to education institutions, to these were many of them union jobs, to an actual training program that pulls from the community, including in a very intentional way people who are normally left out of good jobs if we don't think holistically about who we recruit and who we train. And that is a model for what we've been doing since I've been at the Department of Labor, and something that the Department of Labor would be committed to if I'm confirmed as secretary, which is to really align all the pieces of the system to meet employer needs and to meet the desire of job seekers and people who are in the labor market seeking to upskill for these jobs. It was a fantastic demonstration also of how jobs in advanced manufacturing, right, some of the new clean energy work that is being developed is actually creating multiple opportunities, not just for the things, not just for semiconductor chips, not just for things that get created, but for actual people to find their way into the middle class.
And I just want to take a minute and talk a little bit about, in the very beginning of the opening of the meeting, it was mentioned about the administration and unions. This is the strongest administration for union labor and the middle class, uplifting the middle class that we have seen in history. That's probably why it's being attacked. And so when we go forward, I think it's important for us to realize that union jobs and union wages lift up all wages throughout every community. In my district in Northwest Indiana, it's vitally important. So when the administration invests in the infrastructure bill and the CHIPS and Science Act, and there are components to it that include union labor, that's lifting up America and the middle class. That's why I'm here in Congress, and hopefully that's why the administration keeps fighting for those middle class jobs and keeps fighting to make sure that we are providing a pathway for good wages, safe work environments, health insurance, and good pensions. And if we continue to do that, I think America will be better for it. I know my district will be. So I ask you to keep fighting for those, all workers, but to keep in mind that union labor lifts all wages and lifts all boats, and I truly believe that, and I thank you for your commitment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Mr. James for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Madam Acting Secretary, thank you for being here today. I'm sure that these proceedings are a bit exhausting. I was a pilot in the Army, and I remember my oral examinations. I appreciate you being here. But I have some very important questions for my district. Franchising is one of the surest ways for Americans to achieve the American dream. As a walking recipient and result of the American dream, my father came up from the Jim Crow South with a truck, a trailer, and no excuses, was able to achieve something he didn't even think was possible. He was able to pass a very profitable automotive logistics business to his family now, and through franchising, many folks in my district and around the country are able to achieve a better future for themselves and for their families. But there's growing concern that one of my new neighbors in Shelby Township, a franchise owner, based upon what she's hearing, it appears that joint employer policies coming from the DOL and the Biden administration as a whole will disrupt not just her business model, but the franchising business model. That pathway to prosperity for so many Americans will be disrupted. She asked me to tell you and relay to the Biden administration that she has the right to fully own and run her business. She has mortgaged and sacrificed for it, and she needs your help in protecting that American dream. Those policies run contrary to that. If these policies are enacted, specific to joint employer policies, she fears that her business will be shut down or that she will cede her operational control to the federal government. And we all understand exactly what ceding business and the modes of production to federal government means. I would like to know, so I can tell her, why does it seem so often that the administration is adversarial to businesses, DOL in particular, through policies that cast entrepreneurs aside?
Congressman, thank you so much for that question. I think you can tell her that for me, my family also owned a franchisee business. My parents went from, my dad flipped burgers as a new immigrant. He exchanged coins in a casino when that was actually still a job to do, right? Bills for coins. My mom worked temp jobs. My parents owned a franchisee business too, and just as you described, it helped them to move from insecurity to security. It was the reason why my parents were able to pay for both my sister and me to go to college. So
That's
I
wonderful.
believe in the
So given your background, your personal family experience, you agree that franchise owners are small businesses?
Yeah, absolutely, they can be. I mean, many of them are, yes.
Outstanding. And so, given your personal experience, can you commit to no more additional rulemaking on joint employment?
Thank you, Congressman. I really appreciate the opportunity to have a discussion about these issues, because sometimes I think we talk past each other about things. There is no rule about joint employer on the Department of Labor's agenda at all.
So that's a commitment to no additional rulemaking on joint employment.
There's nothing on our agenda to do a joint employer rule.
But things change. Things change. Can I have your commitment, given your family's background and your personal experience and the fact that small business owners are the pathway to the American dream? Can I have your commitment today?
You have my commitment to continue to work closely with small businesses to make sure that what we are doing honors their struggle, honors their work. I'm not answering that question directly only because I think whatever we do, it's inappropriate for me to say with certainty. There are lots of things that
Well, I think a commitment to the American dream is worthy of a direct answer. Given your family's experience, just the additional rulemaking, if I can take that back to her, further commitment. You've already said that it's not on the agenda. If we can continue that forward, that would be great for folks, entrepreneurs, and franchisees all over the country who are depending on this business model to succeed.
I mean, Congressman, let me say it this way. I do not have plans to do that. If I did, I would have put it on the agenda. There's nothing on our agenda that would suggest that we're going to do a joint employer rule. What may be causing confusion, and what I think has been clarified here, is that there are other agencies that are pursuing such rules. They're not affiliated with the Department of Labor.
I think the fear comes is once you are confirmed, there have been very little that the federal government has done to engender trust amongst the American people. And I was looking for a confirmation that you would at least leave that one alone so we can have some sort of stability as folks try to achieve the American dream. It looks like we do not have that commitment. We'll have to circle back later. Thank you for your time, Madam Acting Secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. James. Ms. Letlow, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you, Acting Secretary, for taking the time to be before this committee. And it's important that Congress and this administration continue to invest in rural communities, such as my district. I serve 24 parishes, and create opportunities to help these areas flourish and grow. Organizations in my district have benefited from the Labor Department programs like Youth Build. Since 2001, North Shore Technical Community College in Bogalusa, Louisiana, has hosted a highly successful Youth Build program in a rural, impoverished area. And I am told that this program has an impressive degree or certificate completion rate of 96%. That is above the average post-program placement rate, with many students choosing to go on to attend North Shore Community College to further their education. Unfortunately, this department did not award Bogalusa's program in the latest Youth Build grant competition. And it's my understanding that this department instead prioritized awarding grants to a number of new applicants, while many long-standing successful programs were shut out. I'm extremely disappointed with this outcome, as are my constituents. And some of the feedback that the department provided on North Shore's application is that it did not do enough to promote green jobs, ensure post-program employment will allow students the opportunity to collectively bargain and form or join a union, and increase equity in apprenticeships for people of color and women. This is an odd conclusion because I am told that at least half of the Bogalusa program's participants are minorities and women. Acting Secretary, why did the department start pushing its own agenda items over the original intent of the program, which is providing education, workforce development, and life and leadership skills for out-of-school youth? And why did the department not prioritize proven performance metrics of successful, long-standing programs just like the one in Bogalusa?
Thank you very much for that question, Congresswoman. I will say that in general, the things that you said, they're consistent with how I view the need to, we should support programs that actually prepare people in communities that, including in rural communities, where they might not always enjoy the investments or understand that government is there to also support them. I agree that we should use data-driven, proven models. I don't have the specifics on the issue that you are asking about. I do know that we have a workforce opportunities in rural communities grant, different from Youth Build, but specifically to invest in rural communities specifically, recognizing that there are specific needs, that some of those needs have not always been met, and would be happy to make sure that you and your constituents are aware of other grant programs that we have. I'm sorry, I don't have the detail on exactly what the decision was in the program that you were talking about.
I'd love to hear your details about it, because that was the feedback that we received, that it was about not being able to join a union or green initiatives. And this Youth Build program has been incredibly beneficial for my district since 2001. So it's devastating that they were denied this year. I want to switch gears. The change in H-2A adverse effect wage rate methodology will tremendously increase the wage rate for H-2A workers in certain job classifications. I believe this is probably the most detrimental rule that has hit Louisiana agriculture in recent years and has created a firestorm throughout U.S. agriculture. For example, in Louisiana, H-2A workers who drive sugarcane trucks from the field to the sugar mill will have the wage rate change from $13.67 to $22.60 per hour. That is almost a 9-hour increase in 1 year. The impact to Louisiana sugarcane harvest drivers alone will cost sugarcane farmers in my state an additional $37 million in additional wages. The impact is not specific to sugar. The impact is this severe to many other commodities in my district and across the nation. And I must insist the estimated impact of the March 30th, 2023 H-2A wage rule of $100 million has been grossly underestimated and will cause a severe hardship for the U.S. agriculture industry. Acting Secretary, can you tell me if the department solicited meaningful input from the agriculture industry prior to promulgating the rule?
Thank you so much for that question, Congresswoman. So as you're referring to, the H-2A program, one of its components is to make sure that there isn't an adverse effect on U.S. workers by using the program. And that's what the adverse effect wage rate that you're talking about refers to. As I've said here, we, as a department, we are very, very deliberative in the creation of any rules. And we do engage with stakeholders, with interested parties to fully understand the impact of our rules, to make sure that we're taking account the multiple perspectives and impacts, and to make sure that we get it right.
Right. Your claim to have the industry input based off a survey, but every indication shows that there was low participation in the said survey. And if you asked my constituents, you would have clearly known about these enormous increases in operating costs that are putting farmers out of business in Louisiana. And can you tell me how many agriculture producers in Louisiana's 5th Congressional District answered this survey or provided feedback to you about this rule?
Ms. Letlow, we're going to have to let the acting secretary submit her answers to you in writing. All of us would like to know the answer to that question. Thank you. I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Scott, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Ms. Sue, your life story is an inspiration to some of us, apparently not all. At the announcement of your nomination, it was mentioned that your mother came from China on a cargo ship because she couldn't afford the fare. And later in her life, she talked to the President of the United States, who said that her daughter was going to be nominated as the Secretary of the United States Department of Labor. I mean, the career in between certainly is an inspiration. Now, you maintain your composure and decorum while many spent their time to explain what they would do as senators, which they are not. or challenge you on what you have done to hurt job production even after the administration that you belong to created more jobs in 28 months than any presidential administration has been able to do in a four-year term. They attacked your credit, your character. They attacked your character, but not the record number of jobs you've created. Now, let me just say, get a word in about the independent contractor. A lot has been said about how it hurts independent contractors, but I think you mentioned that if you're misclassified as an independent contractor rather than an employee, you miss out on unemployment compensation, workers' compensation, you miss out on minimum wage and overtime, you miss out on the employer contribution for Social Security, you miss out on health and pension benefits that other employees get. So the employee has a lot of disadvantage in being misclassified, but the employer also benefits with the misclassification because they don't have to pay the Social Security tax and they save a lot of money on the others, giving unfair competition to those that compete fairly and classify people fairly. You talked about the joint employment rule. The only thing that the franchisees are not hurt by any proposed joint employment rule. It's a franchisor who may be held responsible for what they've done that escape through lax joint employment rules. So although that's not on your agenda, I think that should be clarified. Could you say a word about why you need more money for OSHA inspections?
Thank you very much for that question, Ranking Member Scott. So our OSHA does workplace investigations to ensure that workplaces are safe and healthy and that every worker who goes to work at the beginning of the day returns home. In 2021, there were over 5,000 working people who lost their lives on the job, and at least 2 million who had work-related non-fatal injuries. These are entirely preventable, and we should be doing everything we can to make sure that workers don't have to work under unsafe conditions, that a worker who works on a roof.
If you get the allocation you've requested, you'd be able to investigate, you'd be able to visit each business, once in every 100 years?
Right, OSHA's...
If you get the increased allocation. Can you say a word about what you are doing for youth employment, particularly disconnected youth?
Yes, thank you so much for that question too, Ranking Member Scott. So as we've talked about here today, young people have the tremendous potential to benefit from the robust economic recovery that we've had and the fact that a large number of jobs that are going to be created will not require a college degree. And so we have investments in youth across our workforce system, everything from apprenticeship programs and pre-apprenticeship programs to WIOA-funded youth programs that are going to make sure that young people understand that in this historic moment, we want them also to be able to benefit.
A comment was made about discrimination, religious discrimination in federal employment. Some employers want to be able to discriminate and have a policy of not hiring people of certain religions and still get a federal contract. I would hope you'd do everything you could to avoid that. And could you say just a word about why it's important to increase sanctions for unfair labor practices?
Yes, thank you so much for that question too. So we've talked about child labor here today. What we are seeing in situations where you have really egregious exploitation of young people, that the penalties that we were able to assess in that particular case that had over 100 young people 13 to 17 years old was about $1.5 million. It was now widely considered not to have been enough to deter those violations, and so we're happy to be working with, to respond to requests for technical assistance from Congress about what increased penalties might look like.
And unfair labor practices and organizing?
Right, so that is within the purview of the National Labor Relations Board, which is a separate body from the Department of Labor. We don't have rules about that particular issue.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for your testimony. Madam Chair, can I introduce for the record several comments have been made about the the child labor. You'll note we sent a letter to you a few days ago to schedule a hearing on child labor abuses. And I was delighted to see a colleague from Indiana mention this as an issue. So maybe we could work together to get a hearing on that.
Do you wish to enter the letter
yes,
into the record?
Again, yes.
Without objections, we will do that.
So why don't we just chat for
Okay. I would like to again thank our witness for taking the time to testify before the committee today. I made several comments asking that you respond to questions when people had run out of time and way over time sometimes. And I think your staff has probably taken notes. Our staff has taken notes. And so I would appreciate it very much if we could get timely responses to those questions that have been asked, so that we will try to compile something, but, and we appreciate the commitments that were made today, which we will certainly follow up on. Without objection, there being no further business, the committee stands adjourned.